Nathan Sullivan's hand trembled against the damp forest floor, his fingers curling weakly around fallen pine needles as consciousness flickered like a dying flame. The wolf emerged from between ancient oaks, silver-gray in the fading light, yellow eyes fixed on the collapsed figure before him. Not the death Nathan had imagined after 47 years of marriage. Officer Reynolds dropped his radio, mouth agape, while Deputy Morris stumbled backward, nearly tripping over exposed roots. The massive wolf, standing protectively over the elderly man, wasn't retreating despite their drawn weapons. The gold wedding band on Nathan's finger caught the last ray of sunlight, a painful reminder of breakfasts shared over crossword puzzles and Rebecca's lavender-scented hand cream that once soothed his nightmares after Vietnam. "Hold your fire!" shouted Sheriff Baker, though his own weathered hand hovered over his holster. How had a disabled veteran ended up miles from civilization with a wild predator as his only guardian angel? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia had been Nathan Sullivan's sanctuary long before they became his prison. At 68, the former park ranger's body had betrayed him, stroke-ravaged and half-paralyzed, but his mind remained as sharp as the hawk's vision he'd once been famous for. He knew every trail, cave, and waterfall in these ancient hills, had saved dozens of lost hikers and trapped climbers during his 30-year career. The forest respected him then. Now it would claim him. Rebecca Sullivan had married a mountain of a man at 18. For 47 years, she'd loved the broad shoulders that carried gear up impossible slopes, the hands that built their cabin, the voice that called instructions during wilderness rescues. That man was gone now, replaced by a fragile shell who needed help bathing, who soiled himself at night, whose medical bills had devoured their savings like a wildfire through dry pines. At 65, she had become nurse, physical therapist, and financial manager, roles she never wanted and increasingly resented. Their modest home outside Millridge, Virginia, sat on 3 acres backed by national forest land. The mortgage they'd nearly paid off had been refinanced twice to cover Nathan's treatments. The insurance company's latest denial letter lay crumpled in the kitchen trash. 6 figures in debt, with only Rebecca's small pension keeping them afloat, they were drowning in slow motion. Michael Thompson lived half a mile down the gravel road. The retired ranger had worked alongside Nathan for 20 years, had stood as best man at their wedding, had helped search for their son Jason's body after the climbing accident 15 years ago. He noticed things others missed, like Nathan's empty spot on the porch where his wheelchair usually sat during good weather. What none of the humans knew was that the forest remembered Nathan Sullivan too. Particularly a solitary gray wolf the locals called Ghost, for his uncanny ability to appear and vanish like mountain mist. 9 years old, with battle scars from challenges both won and lost, Ghost had once been the alpha of a small pack before being displaced by younger wolves. Now he roamed alone, recognized by the distinctive notch in his right ear and the barely visible metal tag hidden beneath thick fur, a tag placed there by human hands when he was just a pup. Ghost knew the scent of the human called Nathan. Their paths had crossed before, though neither Rebecca nor Michael knew that history. The wolf had been watching the Sullivan cabin from the tree line for months, observing the slow deterioration of the once powerful human who had altered his fate years before. As October painted the mountains in fire colors, these 4 lives, Nathan, Rebecca, Michael, and Ghost, would become entangled in ways that would leave the community forever changed, raising questions about loyalty, compassion, and the mysterious bonds between species that transcend human understanding. Rebecca Sullivan's hands shook as she folded Nathan's sweater and tucked it into the duffel bag. She'd chosen his warmest clothes, the flannel-lined jeans she could barely pull over his unresponsive legs, the thermal undershirt, the down vest he'd worn on countless ranger patrols. October in the Blue Ridge Mountains wasn't winter, but the nights dropped below 40 degrees, and the weather report mentioned a storm system moving in from the west. "Where are we going, Becky?" Nathan asked from his wheelchair, his words slurring slightly from the damage to the left side of his brain. His right hand, the one that still worked, clutched the armrest, knuckles white. "Just a drive," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Doctor said fresh air would do you good." This wasn't entirely a lie. Dr. Winters had suggested nature therapy during their last visit, noting how Nathan's blood pressure dropped whenever they wheeled him onto the porch overlooking the forest. "Get him out there if you can," he'd said, not understanding the impossibility of maneuvering a wheelchair over mountain trails. Nathan seemed to accept this explanation, nodding slightly. In the 3 years since his stroke, he'd become more compliant, more childlike in his trust. The transformation haunted Rebecca. This passive acceptance from a man who once challenged blizzards and faced down bears. She helped him into his jacket, the routine of dressing him now second nature, right arm first, then manipulate the deadweight left arm through the sleeve, tug the collar straight, zip him up. His body still carried the frame of the ranger he'd been, though thinner now, muscle tone diminishing despite the exercises she faithfully performed with his limbs each morning. "Almost ready," she said, more to herself than to him. The manila envelope from Piedmont Medical Center had arrived yesterday. "Final notice," it declared in bold red letters, $247,852 in outstanding balances. Their third mortgage application had been denied. The property tax bill sat unopened beside it. Rebecca's small pension covered groceries and utilities, nothing more. The lawyer had explained their options: bankruptcy, which wouldn't eliminate the medical debt, or selling the house they'd built together 40 years ago. "Can we go to Oak Ridge Point?" Nathan asked suddenly, his good eye brightening. "Haven't seen it since." He didn't finish, but Rebecca knew. Since before the stroke, since he could walk, since their life made sense. "Yes," she whispered, her throat tightening. "That's exactly where we're going." Oak Ridge Point had been their special place. A natural outlook on the eastern ridge, accessible by a moderately difficult trail that branched off from the main park path. Nathan had proposed to her there. They'd scattered their son Jason's ashes there after recovering his body from the North Face. Generations of Sullivans had walked that trail. The ancient Ford pickup grumbled to life, its rusted frame a testament to better days. Rebecca had arranged Nathan's wheelchair in the truck bed, secured with bungee cords. Getting him into the passenger seat took 15 minutes of grunting effort, a dance they'd perfected through necessity. His body was dead weight on his left side, requiring her to support him while simultaneously guiding his movements. "Sorry," he mumbled, as she struggled to buckle his seatbelt. "Not your fault," she replied automatically, the phrase worn smooth from repetition. The drive took 40 minutes, winding up mountain roads increasingly narrowed by encroaching forest. They passed only 2 other vehicles, a Park Service truck and a logger's rig. October weekdays meant solitude in these parts, especially with storm clouds gathering. Rebecca drove slowly, one eye on the darkening sky. They reached the small clearing that served as an unofficial parking area for Oak Ridge Point. No other cars. Perfect. Rebecca stopped the truck and sat motionless, hands still gripping the steering wheel. "Made it," Nathan said, smiling at her. For a moment she saw the handsome ranger who'd swept her off her feet, whose confidence in these mountains had seemed limitless. The moment passed. Reality returned. A paralyzed man, an exhausted woman, insurmountable debt, endless care, no future. "I need to check the trail first," Rebecca said, stepping out of the truck. "See if I can get your chair through." This was another lie. The trail to Oak Ridge Point would never accommodate a wheelchair. Narrow, root-strewn, with a steep section near the outlook. She knew this. Nathan, if he were thinking clearly, would know this too. She walked around to his side of the truck and opened the door. "I think we can make it part way. Let me help you out." The process of extracting him from the seat was even more difficult than getting him in. His good arm wrapped around her shoulders as she half-carried, half-dragged him to the trailhead. The first 50 yards were relatively flat, and she managed to support him as they shuffled forward, his right leg doing most of the work while his left dragged uselessly. "Like old times," he grunted, though the strain in his voice betrayed him. "Almost there," she encouraged, though Oak Ridge Point was still a quarter-mile away. When they reached a fallen oak that crossed the path, Rebecca stopped. "Let's rest here," she said, lowering him to sit on the massive trunk. The old tree had been there for years, a landmark on their many hikes. She sat beside him, both of them breathing heavily from the exertion. The forest enveloped them, pine and oak, the musty scent of autumn decay, the distant cry of a hawk. Nathan closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. "Smells like home," he murmured. Rebecca felt the tears start, hot tracks down her wind-chilled cheeks. She'd rehearsed this moment for weeks, planned what to say, how to explain. Now, words failed her. "Nathan," she began, then stopped. "I know," he said quietly, surprising her. "You're leaving me here." The simple statement, delivered without accusation, broke something inside her. A sob escaped, then another. "How did you—" "Been a ranger too long not to recognize a final trip," he said, his good hand finding hers. "Saw you pack my warmest clothes, noticed you left my medications behind, watched you fill the truck with gas yesterday, even though we're broke." Rebecca couldn't speak, shame and relief warring within her. "It's okay, Becky," he continued, his voice steady. "Been thinking about it myself. These woods, they're the right place, better than some nursing home where we'd never see each other anyway." "I can't do it anymore," she whispered. "The bills, the care, watching you suffer. I'm drowning, Nathan. I haven't slept through the night in 3 years." "The money's gone. They're taking the house. I've failed you, failed us." "You never failed me," he said firmly. "You gave everything too much." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of decades between them. A distant rumble of thunder warned of the approaching storm. "Will you do one thing for me?" Nathan asked finally. "Anything. Help me get to the point. Want to see it one last time." Rebecca hesitated. Oak Ridge Point was still some distance away, including a steep section she doubted he could manage even with her help. "Please, Becky. One last view." She couldn't deny him this. They struggled forward, the journey taking nearly an hour to cover a distance that once would have taken them 10 minutes. Nathan's determination was extraordinary, his face set with the same focus he'd shown on rescue missions. When they finally reached the rocky outcropping that formed Oak Ridge Point, both were drenched in sweat despite the cool air. The view opened before them, rolling mountains in autumn glory, valleys carved by ancient waters, the distant silver ribbon of the Shenandoah River. They had seen this view in all seasons, all weathers, all stages of their life together. "Worth it," Nathan breathed, leaning heavily against her. Rebecca helped him sit on a flat rock near the edge, positioning him to face the vista. She sat beside him, her arm around his shoulders, feeling the tremors of exertion running through him. "I brought food and water," she said, pulling a small pack from inside her jacket. "Enough for a couple of days." "Always prepared," he smiled faintly. "Taught you well." "The storm might miss us," she continued, though they both knew the darkening western sky told a different story. "Michael checks our place every couple of days. He'll notice we're gone." Another lie. She'd left a note for Michael asking him not to come by until next week, claiming they were visiting her sister in Tennessee. "Tell me what happened to us, Becky," Nathan said suddenly, his gaze still on the distant mountains. The question undid her. What had happened to the vibrant couple who'd hiked these trails, made love under these stars, built a life in these mountains? How had they become an invalid and his resentful caretaker, drowning in debt and desperation? Life happened, she answered finally. Bad luck, bad timing, bad choices by a system that sees us as numbers, not people. Nathan nodded slowly. Not your fault, he said, echoing her earlier words. You deserve better than changing my diapers till one of us dies. The brutal honesty made her flinch, but she couldn't deny the truth of it. The indignities of his condition had worn them both raw. I brought your father's watch, she said, pulling the heirloom timepiece from her pocket. And this, a small flask of bourbon, Nathan's favorite. And these, a bottle of her sleeping pills, nearly full. Nathan took the watch, running his thumb over its scratched surface. Dad always said a man should know what time it is when he meets his maker. He looked at the pills, but didn't take them. Might not need those. Nature has its own way. Rebecca had imagined this moment differently. Perhaps more dramatic protest from him or tearful recriminations. Instead, there was this strange peace between them, an understanding built on decades of love, now transformed into something more complex. I should get back before dark, she said finally, the words tasting like ash. You should, he agreed. Roads get tricky in storms. She stood, legs unsteady. I don't know how to say goodbye. Nathan looked up at her, his weathered face serene despite everything. Then don't. Just say you love me. That's enough. I love you, Nathan. I've always loved you. I know, Becky. Go on now. I've got one last sunset to watch. She kissed him then, tasting salt and pine and 47 years of shared breath. Then she turned and walked away, not looking back, knowing if she did, her resolve would crumble. The forest swallowed her, branches catching at her clothes like accusing fingers. By the time she reached the truck, tears had given way to a numb efficiency. She unstrapped the wheelchair from the truck bed and left it leaning against a tree, evidence for whoever found it that Nathan had come here voluntarily. Then she drove away, the first heavy raindrops splattering against the windshield. Behind her, on Oak Ridge Point, Nathan Sullivan watched the approaching storm front, his ranger's eye calculating its path and intensity. He uncapped the bourbon flask with his good hand and took a long swallow, welcoming the familiar burn. Well, old man, he said aloud to the empty forest, looks like this is your last tour of duty. Far below in the valley, invisible to human eyes, a solitary gray figure moved through the underbrush, nose raised to catch a familiar scent carried on the storm winds. The first drops of rain struck Nathan's face as the sunset disappeared behind thickening clouds. He pulled his jacket tighter with his good hand, grateful for Rebecca's foresight in dressing him warmly. The bourbon had spread a deceptive warmth through his chest, but he knew it wouldn't last against the night chill. He checked his father's pocket watch, 6:17 p.m. Night fell early in October, and with the storm rolling in, darkness would come sooner. He had faced death before, in Vietnam during treacherous rescues when they lost Jason, but never like this, a slow surrender to elements he had once mastered. There was a certain symmetry to it. The mountains had defined his life. Now they would witness its end. The rain intensified, driven sideways by gusting wind. The temperature dropped noticeably. Nathan's shelter options were limited by his immobility. He couldn't retreat to the woods, couldn't construct any kind of cover. The rock overhang beside him offered minimal protection, but it was better than nothing. With tremendous effort, he shifted his body, dragging his unresponsive left side until he was partially sheltered. Come on, Sullivan, he muttered to himself, using the drill sergeant voice that had once commanded rescue teams. You've survived worse than this. But he hadn't, not really. Not alone, not with half his body betraying him, not with night falling and a storm building. The truth settled over him like the growing darkness. This would be his last night. The only question was whether hypothermia, exposure, or predators would claim him first. The thought of predators sent a primitive chill through him that had nothing to do with the rain. Bears were rare but present in these mountains. Coyotes were common, and wolves had been reintroduced to parts of Virginia years ago, their population slowly expanding. As if summoned by his thoughts, Nathan heard it, a sound distinct from the storm, from the creaking trees and pattering rain, a soft footfall on wet leaves, then another. Something large was moving through the underbrush below the outlook. Nathan's ranger instincts, dormant but not dead, kicked in. He stilled his breathing, straining to hear over the rain. The footfalls stopped. Then a sound that raised the hair on his arms, the distinct snuffling of an animal scenting the air. "Hello?" he called, his voice thin against the wind. No human would be on the trail in this weather, but some primal instinct made him try. Silence. Then more deliberate footsteps, coming closer. Nathan's right hand groped uselessly for a weapon, finding only small rocks, pathetic defense against whatever approached. A large shape materialized at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of Nathan's clear vision in the fading light. It moved with fluid grace, pausing at the perimeter. Nathan squinted, trying to make out details. Too large for a coyote, too low to the ground for a bear, wolf. The animal took another step forward, and Nathan's breath caught. It was massive, its coat a silver gray that seemed to absorb the last remnants of daylight. Yellow eyes fixed on him with unnerving intelligence. Nathan had encountered wolves during his ranger years, always from a distance, always with respect for their space and power. He'd advocated for their reintroduction, argued with hunters and farmers about their ecological importance. He'd never feared them. He feared this one now. The wolf took another step, then another, a deliberate approach that suggested neither fear nor aggression, just assessment. It stopped 10 feet away, close enough for Nathan to see the rise and fall of its powerful chest, the twitching ears attentive to every sound. "Well," Nathan said quietly, "didn't expect company for my last sunset." The wolf's head tilted slightly, as if considering his words. Then, with shocking deliberation, it sat on its haunches, still watching him. Nathan's ranger training kicked in. No sudden movements, no direct eye contact, no threatening gestures. But his paralysis made these precautions redundant. He couldn't move quickly if he wanted to. "Just passing through?" he asked, the absurdity of conversing with a wild predator not lost on him. "Or are you waiting for me to become an easier meal?" The wolf made no sound, but its ears flicked forward at his voice. The rain was falling steadily now, matting the animal's thick fur. A gust of wind drove the rain harder, and Nathan shivered involuntarily. Something changed in the wolf's posture, a subtle shift that Nathan couldn't quite define. It stood again and moved closer, now just 6 feet away. Nathan's heart hammered in his chest. At this distance he could see details, a notch in the right ear, a graying muzzle suggesting an older animal, and something else, a glint of metal half hidden in the fur. "You've got a tag," Nathan breathed, recognition dawning. "You're part of the reintroduction program." The wolf's head lowered slightly, and in that moment, a memory surfaced in Nathan's mind. A day 9 years ago, a younger ranger, an illegal trap discovered on park boundaries, a wolf pup injured but alive, the careful extraction, the tagging procedure, the release back to its pack. Could it be? Ghost? he whispered, using the nickname local rangers had given to the elusive alpha male that occasionally appeared in trail cam footage. "Is that you, boy?" The wolf's posture changed again, tension flowing out of its powerful shoulders. It took another step forward, close enough now that Nathan could smell the wild musk of its coat. Then, with a deliberation that defied everything Nathan knew about wild wolves, it lowered itself to the ground, just 4 feet away from him. They stayed like that, man and wolf, as darkness completed its descent and the storm reached its full intensity. Rain pounded the exposed rock, wind howled through the trees, thunder rolled across the valleys. Nathan huddled against his meager shelter, the cold seeping into his bones despite his layers. His thoughts drifted to Rebecca. She would be home by now, perhaps sitting at their kitchen table, perhaps crying, perhaps already regretting her decision. He didn't blame her. How could he? The stroke had stolen his life, her life, their future together. The system had failed them. Inadequate insurance, astronomical medical costs, non-existent support for caregivers. She had given everything until there was nothing left to give. A particularly violent shiver ran through Nathan's body. The early stages of hypothermia he recognized distantly. His thoughts were becoming sluggish, his extremities numb. The pocket watch read 9:38, though he could barely make out the hands in the darkness. The wolf raised its head, yellow eyes luminous in the gloom. It stood, shaking water from its coat, in a spray that Nathan barely felt through his growing numbness. He expected it to leave, to seek better shelter. Instead it circled once, twice, then settled again, this time pressing its large body against Nathan's side. The heat radiating from the animal was immediate and startling. Thick fur, designed to withstand mountain winters, created a barrier against the wind and rain. The wolf's body temperature, higher than a human's, flowed into Nathan's chilled form. "Well, I'll be damned," Nathan murmured, unable to process this unprecedented behavior. Wild wolves didn't cuddle with humans. They didn't share body heat. They certainly didn't offer comfort to strangers in storms. But Ghost wasn't a stranger, was he? Somehow, across the years and against all probability, the wolf remembered. The pup Nathan had freed from the trap, had gently treated and released, had grown into this magnificent animal who now returned the favor in some incomprehensible act of recognition or reciprocity. The warmth from the wolf's body gradually penetrated Nathan's sodden clothes. His shivering subsided. The immediate threat of hypothermia receded. It wouldn't last forever. The storm was forecasted to continue through the night, and even a wolf's body heat couldn't indefinitely stave off the effects of exposure, but it bought him time. "Guess I'm not checking out just yet," Nathan said, his voice steadier now. "Rebecca's going to be surprised when she finds out her plan didn't work." The wolf shifted slightly, settling more firmly against him. Its massive head rested on its paws, yellow eyes half closed but still watchful. Hours passed. The storm raged, then gradually diminished to a steady rainfall. Nathan drifted in and out of consciousness, each return to awareness a surprise. He was still alive. The wolf was still there, a solid presence against his right side. Its rhythmic breathing became Nathan's focus, something to concentrate on besides the cold and the pain and the knowledge of abandonment. In his more lucid moments, Nathan wondered at the extraordinary situation. His scientific mind sought explanations. Perhaps the wolf was old, seeking easy companionship in its final years. Perhaps it had been habituated to humans during the tagging process. Perhaps it was simply using Nathan as shelter from the storm, an arrangement of mutual benefit. None of these explanations satisfied him. There was something more happening here, something that transcended conventional understanding of wildlife behavior. Dawn approached imperceptibly, a gradual lightening of the absolute darkness. The rain had stopped, though water still dripped from saturated leaves and branches. Nathan's clothes were soaked through, his body alternating between violent shivering and dangerous stillness. Only the wolf's constant warmth had kept death at bay. With the first true light, Ghost stirred. He stood, stretching his powerful body, then moved a few paces away. Nathan felt the loss of warmth immediately. "Heading out?" he asked, his voice a rasp. "Don't blame you. Been a long night." The wolf turned to face him, yellow eyes now golden in the morning light. It regarded him for a long moment, then did something that stopped Nathan's breath. It lowered its head in what looked unmistakably like a nod, then turned and trotted into the forest. Nathan stared after it, wondering if hypothermia was causing him to hallucinate. Had he imagined the entire night? But no, the compressed leaves where the wolf had lain beside him confirmed its presence. He checked the pocket watch, 6:22 a.m. He had survived the night. Rebecca would be waking now, perhaps wondering if he was already gone, perhaps preparing to call Michael with some story about his disappearance. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. He fumbled with numb fingers for the small pack Rebecca had left, extracting a protein bar and a bottle of water. The simple act of eating and drinking required immense concentration, but it restored some clarity to his thoughts. The reality of his situation reasserted itself. He had survived one night, but without help, he wouldn't survive another. His clothes were wet, the temperature was dropping again, and his body, already compromised, was weakening further. A sound from the forest edge drew his attention. Ghost had returned, and in his mouth, dangling limp and bloody, was a rabbit. The wolf approached cautiously, watching Nathan's reaction. Then, with deliberate gentleness, it placed the rabbit on the ground between them and backed away. Nathan stared in disbelief. "You're bringing me food?" Ghost made no sound, but his intent was unmistakable. He nudged the rabbit closer with his nose, then sat, watching expectantly. "I appreciate the gesture," Nathan said, "but I can't exactly eat that raw." He held up the remaining protein bar. "I've got this for now." The wolf's expression, and Nathan was now convinced the animal had expressions, seemed almost disappointed. It looked at the rabbit, then back at Nathan, then picked up its kill and retreated a short distance. There, to Nathan's continued amazement, it began to eat, tearing into the carcass with efficient movements. After finishing its meal, the wolf returned to Nathan's side, settling once more against him. Its body was warm from exertion, its breath carrying the metallic scent of fresh blood. "You're something else," Nathan murmured, his good hand tentatively touching the wolf's damp fur. The animal didn't flinch or growl, it simply turned its head slightly, making eye contact with a directness that seemed almost human. In that moment, a strange peace settled over Nathan Sullivan. He was still stranded, still injured, still likely to die on this mountain, but he was no longer alone. For reasons he couldn't comprehend, this wild creature had chosen to stand vigil with him, to share warmth, to offer what protection it could. Rebecca had left him to die with dignity in the place he loved most. What she couldn't have known, what neither of them could have imagined, was that the forest would send its own guardian to watch over him in his final hours. The Sullivan house sat dark and silent, curtains drawn against curious eyes. Inside, Rebecca moved through familiar rooms like a ghost, touching objects that now seemed to belong to another life. Nathan's reading glasses on the side table, his ranger hat hanging by the door, the indentation on his side of the bed where his wheelchair had bumped it thousands of times. She hadn't slept. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Nathan's face as she walked away. Calm, understanding, forgiving. It was the forgiveness that tormented her most. Anger she could have withstood. Accusations would have given her something to push against, but his quiet acceptance left her defenseless against her own conscience. The pill bottle sat on the kitchen counter, her own prescription for anxiety, nearly full. Beside it lay Nathan's medical insurance denial, the mortgage foreclosure notice, and 3 shut-off warnings from utility companies. The paper trail of their disintegration. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty house. The grandfather clock, Nathan's inheritance from his father, chimed 7 times. Morning had arrived, the first day of her life without him. Through the kitchen window she saw clouds breaking, sunlight spearing through in golden shafts. Had the storm been as bad up on the ridge? Had he— She cut the thought short, unable to bear the images it conjured. The phone rang, startling her. Michael Thompson's name appeared on the caller ID. Rebecca stared at it, her heart racing. Too soon. He shouldn't be calling yet. She'd left the note asking him not to check on them until next week. She let it ring until voicemail picked up. A minute later, the phone rang again. Still Michael. Again, she didn't answer. When it rang a third time, she finally lifted the receiver, her hand trembling. "Hello? Rebecca?" Michael's voice was tense. "Everything okay?" "I've been trying to reach Nathan on his cell." Nathan's cell phone lay charging on the counter. She'd deliberately left it behind. "He's—" Her voice failed. "He's not here right now." A pause. "Oh, where is he?" The lie came automatically. "We just got back from my sister's in Tennessee. He's napping. The trip was hard on him." Another pause, longer this time. "That's funny, because I'm standing in your driveway, and your truck has mud all over it. Fresh mud. Like it was just out on mountain roads during yesterday's storm." Rebecca's blood went cold. She moved to the front window and peered through the curtains. Sure enough, Michael's battered Jeep was parked behind her truck, and the man himself was standing beside it, phone to his ear, looking directly at the house. "Why are you checking on us?" she asked, her voice hollow. "I left a note." "I never got any note," Michael replied. "I came by because Nathan and I had a phone call scheduled. We do it every Tuesday, Ranger reminiscing he calls it. He didn't answer, so I got worried." The note was still in her purse. In her fog of guilt and grief, she'd forgotten to put it in Michael's mailbox. "I'm coming to the door, Rebecca," Michael said firmly. "We need to talk face to face." The line went dead. Rebecca stood frozen, watching as Michael walked up the path to the front porch. His knock was gentle but insistent. For a wild moment she considered not answering, pretending to be away. But Michael had been Nathan's friend for 40 years. He had a key. He would come in eventually. She opened the door, bracing herself. Michael Thompson had aged well for 60, still lean and straight-backed with the watchful eyes of a career outdoorsman. Those eyes took in Rebecca's appearance in one comprehensive sweep. The unwashed hair, the clothes she'd worn yesterday, the ravaged expression. "Where is he?" Michael asked without preamble. Rebecca's carefully constructed explanations crumbled. "Oak Ridge Point," she whispered, tears starting. "I left him at Oak Ridge Point." Michael's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. "You left him? In yesterday's storm? Rebecca, what are you saying?" She stepped back, allowing him to enter. In the living room she sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "I couldn't do it anymore," she said, the words spilling out in a torrent. "The care, the bills, watching him suffer. They're taking the house, Michael. Everything's gone. I'm gone. Used up, burned out." He understood. He knew why. "Jesus Christ," Michael breathed, running a hand through his silver hair. "You left Nathan, a paralyzed man, alone on a mountain to die?" When stated so baldly, the horror of her actions crashed over Rebecca with new force. She covered her face with her hands. He wanted it this way. To be in the forest, not some state facility where they keep him alive but not living. And you believe that justified? Michael cut himself off, visibly struggling for control. How long ago? Yesterday afternoon, around 4. Michael checked his watch. So he's been out there at least 15 hours? Through the worst storm we've had this fall. His ranger training took over, his voice shifting to the clipped tones of emergency assessment. What supplies does he have? Water, some food, his warmest clothes? Shelter? First aid? Rebecca shook her head. Temperature dropped to 38 degrees last night, rain totals over 2 inches, wind gusts to 40 miles per hour. Michael listed the facts with growing intensity. And you left a man who can't move half his body exposed to those conditions? Each word was a lash. Rebecca had no defense. I'm calling search and rescue, Michael said, pulling out his phone. Wait! Rebecca lunged forward, grabbing his arm. Please, he wanted this. He was ready. Michael stared at her, his expression hardening. That's not your decision to make, or his in his condition. They'll arrest me, she whispered. Elder abandonment. They'll put me in jail. That might happen anyway, Michael replied coldly. But right now, Nathan might still be alive, and every minute counts. The words hit her like a physical blow. Alive. She had convinced herself that Nathan was already gone, that the storm had taken him quickly and relatively painlessly. The possibility that he was still out there, suffering, waiting for help that wasn't coming. Oh, God, she moaned. What have I done? Michael was already dialing. Sheriff's Department? This is Michael Thompson, retired ranger. I need to report a missing person at high risk. Nathan Sullivan, 68, partially paralyzed from stroke. Last seen at Oak Ridge Point approximately 15 hours ago. As he spoke, Rebecca's mind raced through possibilities. If Nathan had survived the night, a remote chance but not impossible given his outdoor experience, then what was happening to him now? Was he conscious? In pain? Calling for help that wouldn't come? Yes, I believe it was intentional abandonment, Michael continued, his eyes on Rebecca. His wife left him there. She's with me now. We'll meet the search team at the Oak Ridge trailhead in 30 minutes. He ended the call and immediately made another, this one to the Park Service where he still had connections. His terse explanation mobilized additional resources, rangers who knew the area, a tracking dog if available. Get your coat, he told Rebecca when he finished. You're coming with me. They'll arrest me at the trailhead, she said numbly. Probably, he agreed. But you're the last person who saw him. You know exactly where he is. That might save his life, if there's still a life to save. The accusation in his voice was unmistakable. Rebecca had known Michael for as long as she'd known Nathan. The three of them had shared holidays, celebrated promotions, mourned losses together. Now he looked at her like she was a stranger. Worse, like she was something contemptible. I never meant to hurt him, she said softly. I thought I was being merciful. Michael's expression didn't soften. Save it for the sheriff, and for Nathan, if we find him alive. The drive to the Oak Ridge trailhead passed in tense silence. Rebecca stared out the window at the forest sliding by, the same trees she'd passed yesterday, now transformed by her actions into a corridor of judgment. The mountain roads were slick with mud from the storm, requiring Michael's full concentration. As they rounded the final bend before the trailhead parking area, Rebecca gasped. 3 Sheriff's Department vehicles, 2 Park Service trucks, and an ambulance were already on site. A group of men and women in uniform gathered around a map spread on a truck hood. Michael parked and turned to her. Last chance to do the right thing, Rebecca. Tell them exactly where he is. Don't leave anything out. She nodded mutely, her eyes fixed on the scene outside. As they approached the group, a tall man with a sheriff's star stepped forward. Mr. Thompson, Sheriff Baker. We've got teams assembling now. His gaze shifted to Rebecca, hardening instantly. Mrs. Sullivan. I'm placing you under temporary detention pending investigation into the abandonment of a vulnerable adult. You have the right to remain silent. Please, Rebecca interrupted. Find him first. Arrest me later. I can show you exactly where he is. The sheriff paused, then nodded curtly. You'll accompany the primary search team under my supervision. If this is some kind of trick, it's not, she assured him. I want him found as much as you do. A deputy approached with a topographic map. Rebecca leaned over it, finding Oak Ridge Point immediately. Here, she said, pointing, near the eastern edge of the outlook, there's a small rock overhang where he was trying to shelter. Sheriff Baker relayed the information to his teams via radio, then assigned 4 deputies, 2 park rangers, and Michael to the primary search group. The medical team would follow once Nathan's condition was assessed. As they prepared to depart, Rebecca noticed a familiar figure at the edge of the group, Nathan's neurologist, Dr. Winters, carrying a medical backpack. "Doctor?" she called, surprised. "How did you—" "Michael called me," the doctor explained, his usual friendly manner replaced by professional detachment. "Given Nathan's condition, I thought my specific expertise might be needed." The implication was clear. Nathan might have suffered additional neurological damage from exposure beyond his existing deficits. Another consequence she hadn't fully considered. The search party set out at a fast clip following the muddy trail toward Oak Ridge Point. Rebecca struggled to keep up, her sleepless night and emotional exhaustion taking their toll. No one offered to slow down for her benefit. As they hiked, she relived yesterday's journey in reverse, passing the fallen oak where she'd left Nathan to rest, navigating the steep section that had been so difficult with him, approaching the final stretch to the outlook. "Should be just ahead," she called to Sheriff Baker, who was leading the group. The sheriff raised a hand, signaling a halt. "Sullivan!" he shouted. "Nathan Sullivan, can you hear me?" They listened. Nothing but birdsong and the drip of water from saturated leaves. "Nathan!" Michael's voice joined in, deeper and more carrying from years of wilderness calls. "It's Michael. Call out if you can hear us." Still nothing. "Spread out," the sheriff ordered. "Standard search pattern." He should be near the eastern edge of the clearing. The team moved forward more cautiously now, eyes scanning the ground for any sign of disturbance. Rebecca headed directly for the rock overhang where she'd left Nathan, her heart pounding so hard she felt lightheaded. She reached the spot first. The flattened vegetation where Nathan had sat was visible, as was the protein bar wrapper from the food she'd left him. But Nathan himself was gone. "He's not here," she called, her voice rising in panic. "This is where I left him, but he's not here." The others converged quickly, professional eyes assessing the scene. "Signs of movement here," one of the rangers noted, pointing to disturbed ground. Something, or someone, was definitely here recently. "Could he have moved himself?" Sheriff Baker asked Dr. Winters. The doctor knelt to examine the area. "Unlikely. Nathan's left side is essentially non-functional. He couldn't have gone far without assistance." "Wildlife, then," another ranger suggested grimly. "After the storm, predators would be hunting." Rebecca felt the world tilt. Predators. The possibility that Nathan had been taken by scavengers, that his body had been dragged away, and— "Track here," the first ranger interrupted, pointing to a depression in the mud several feet away. "Large canid. Wolf, most likely." "Multiple tracks," his colleague added, examining the area more broadly. "Looks like a wolf was definitely here, recently." Michael joined them, his experienced eyes scanning the ground. "These are clear prints, from after the rain stopped, so within the last 8 hours. He looked up, his expression grim. "And there's blood." A small, dark patch stained the rock where Nathan had sheltered. Dr. Winters moved to examine it. "Not much," he noted. "Could be from an injury, or—" He didn't finish the thought. Rebecca swayed on her feet. A deputy grabbed her arm to steady her, though his grip was far from gentle. "Keep looking," Sheriff Baker ordered. "Expand the search area. If wolves dragged him off, they wouldn't have gone far with that kind of weight." The search resumed with renewed urgency, the team spreading out in widening circles from the outlook. Rebecca stood rooted to the spot, unable to process what was happening. The idea that Nathan's body might be scattered across the forest floor, torn apart by predators. "Tracks continue this way," Michael called from the northwestern edge of the clearing. "Wolf prints, definitely, and something being dragged." The group converged on his position. Sure enough, a clear trail led into the denser forest. Large paw prints and a continuous depression suggesting something heavy being pulled over soft ground. "We follow it," Sheriff Baker decided. "Mrs. Sullivan, you stay with Deputy Morris. The rest of us will track this." "I'm coming too," Rebecca insisted, finding her voice. "If that's Nathan, if something's happened to him, I need to know." The sheriff looked like he might refuse, but Michael intervened. "Let her come, Jim. She should see what her actions led to." The cruelty of the statement was deliberate, and Rebecca accepted it as no less than she deserved. They followed the trail deeper into the forest, away from established paths. The going was difficult, with storm debris and mud complicating each step. The tracks remained clear, however, a single wolf moving purposefully, dragging something substantial. After 15 minutes, they entered a small clearing dominated by a massive fallen pine. The tracking ranger raised his hand, signaling a halt. "Movement ahead," he whispered. "Under the root ball of that fallen tree." Sheriff Baker drew his sidearm, a gesture mimicked by his deputies. "Nathan Sullivan," he called. "If you can hear me, respond." Silence. And then a low, rumbling growl emanated from the shadows beneath the upturned roots. "Wolf," Michael confirmed softly. "Everyone hold position." Rebecca strained to see into the darkness beneath the tangle of roots and soil. Was Nathan there? Was anything left of him? The growl came again, louder this time. Then movement, a large shape emerging from the shadows, gray fur catching the filtered sunlight. "Don't shoot," Michael said urgently as the deputies raised their weapons. "Wait!" The wolf stepped fully into view, an enormous specimen with silver-gray fur and intense yellow eyes. It stood with legs braced, hackles raised, teeth bared in unmistakable warning. Behind it, in the shadows of the makeshift den, something moved. "There's something in there," Dr. Winters whispered. "Can't make it out clearly." The wolf growled again, taking a step toward the group, clearly protecting whatever lay behind it. Rebecca couldn't stand the uncertainty another moment. She pushed past the deputy holding her arm and stepped forward. "Rebecca, stop!" Michael hissed. "That's a wild wolf." She ignored him, moving slowly toward the massive predator. "Nathan?" she called, her voice breaking. "Nathan, are you in there?" The wolf's growl intensified, but it didn't advance further. Its eyes locked on Rebecca, recognition flashing in their amber depths. "Mrs. Sullivan, get back here now," Sheriff Baker ordered. "That's a dangerous animal." "Nathan," she called again, desperation overriding caution. And then, from the shadows beneath the roots, a hoarse voice responded. "Becky?" Rebecca's knees buckled. Michael lunged forward to catch her, his own shock evident. "Nathan?" he called. "Is that you?" "Michael?" The voice was weak, but unmistakably Nathan's. "That you out there?" Sheriff Baker lowered his weapon slowly, disbelief written across his features. "Mr. Sullivan, are you injured? Can you come out?" A cough, then, "Can't move much." "And my friend here is pretty protective." The wolf, as if understanding it was being discussed, stopped growling but maintained its defensive posture. Dr. Winters stepped forward cautiously. "Nathan, it's Dr. Winters. We need to assess your condition. Can you tell this animal to let us approach?" A wheezing sound that might have been a laugh came from the den. "Don't think he takes orders from me. But he brought me here, out of the storm, kept me warm, might have saved my life." Rebecca was crying now, relief and disbelief warring within her. Nathan was alive. Somehow, against all odds, he was alive. "The wolf saved him?" Deputy Morris whispered incredulously. "That's impossible." Michael shook his head slowly. "I've been a ranger for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like this. But there's no other explanation. That wolf didn't hunt Nathan, it protected him." Dr. Winters was already assessing the situation professionally. "We need to get to him." His condition could be critical after exposure to those temperatures. "Let me try," Rebecca said, wiping her tears. "The wolf has seen me before. It knows my scent from Nathan's clothes." Before anyone could object, she took another step forward, then another, moving slowly with hands visible. The wolf watched her approach, its posture tense but not overtly aggressive. "Nathan," she called softly, "I'm coming to you. Tell your friend I'm not going to hurt you." "Ghost," Nathan's voice came again, stronger now. "His name is Ghost, and he knows you, Becky. He knows your scent." The wolf, Ghost, held its ground as Rebecca approached, but its growl had subsided to a low rumble. When she was just 6 feet away, it finally stepped aside, creating a path to the den entrance while maintaining its watchful presence. Rebecca dropped to her knees and peered into the shadows. Nathan lay on a bed of dry leaves and pine needles, his back against the earthen wall of the den. His clothes were filthy and damp, his face pale with exposure, but his eyes, those familiar blue eyes, were alert and fixed on her face. "You came back," he said simply. The words broke something inside her. She crawled forward, heedless of the wolf still watching, and reached for Nathan's hand. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I never should have left you. I didn't know what else to do." Nathan's fingers, cold but alive, squeezed hers weakly. "It's okay, Becky. Made a new friend." His eyes shifted to Ghost, who had moved to stand protectively near his head. "Turns out the forest wasn't ready for me to check out yet." Dr. Winters approached cautiously, medical bag in hand. Ghost's ears flattened, but Nathan made a small noise that seemed to reassure the animal. "Let's get him out of there," the doctor instructed. "Carefully." "We don't know what injuries he might have beyond his existing condition." It took 4 men to extract Nathan from the den, lifting him with practiced coordination onto a portable stretcher. Throughout the process, Ghost paced nervously nearby, watching every movement with intense focus. As they prepared to carry Nathan back to the trailhead, Sheriff Baker approached Rebecca. "Mrs. Sullivan, we still have serious questions about your actions. Elder abandonment is a felony." "I know," she said quietly. "I'll face whatever consequences come." Nathan's voice interrupted, weak but determined. "Jim Baker, you've known me 30 years. What happened between me and Becky stays between us. No charges." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Nathan, the law is clear about abandoning vulnerable adults. I can't just ignore—" "She came back," Nathan insisted. "That's what matters. The rest is between me and my wife." Michael, who had been helping secure the stretcher, stepped forward. "Sheriff, I'd like to withdraw my report. This was a misunderstanding. Nathan went to Oak Ridge Point voluntarily, got caught in the storm. Rebecca came to find him as soon as she could." The sheriff looked between them, clearly skeptical. "That doesn't match what I was told initially." "Initial reports are often confused," Michael replied evenly. "The important thing is Nathan's alive, and he doesn't want charges pressed. That should count for something. After a moment's consideration, Sheriff Baker nodded reluctantly. We'll discuss this further once Mr. Sullivan has received medical attention. As they began the careful journey back to the trailhead, Ghost followed at a distance, moving silently through the underbrush parallel to their path. Occasionally Nathan would turn his head, making eye contact with the wolf before it would disappear again into the vegetation. He saved you, Rebecca said wonderingly as they navigated a difficult section of trail. A wild wolf saved you. Nathan's smile was tired but genuine. Not so wild, maybe. We have history, Ghost and I. Turns out good deeds sometimes come back around. What do you mean? Tell you later, he promised, his eyes drifting closed from exhaustion. Got quite a story to tell. When they reached the trailhead, the waiting medical team rushed forward with a gurney and equipment. As they transferred Nathan from the stretcher, taking vitals and starting an IV, Rebecca stood back, watching the efficient emergency response with grateful tears. Michael approached, his expression softer than before. He's going to make it, he said. Nathan always was too stubborn to die on schedule. Michael, Rebecca began, but he raised a hand to stop her. Don't, he said firmly. What you did was unforgivable. But Nathan's alive and he wants to forgive you anyway. That's between you two. Just know I'll be watching. If you ever put him at risk again. The threat remained unspoken but clear. Rebecca nodded, accepting it as her due. As the ambulance doors closed with Nathan inside, Rebecca turned for one last look at the forest edge. There, just visible in the shadows beneath the pines, stood Ghost. The wolf's yellow eyes met hers for a brief moment, not with aggression or fear, but with something that seemed almost like understanding. Then, like his namesake, he vanished into the trees. The Millridge Regional Hospital hummed with the quiet efficiency of a rural medical center accustomed to emergencies but rarely to media attention. By evening, 3 news vans had parked in the visitors' lot, reporters pacing outside the main entrance like expectant fathers. The story had leaked, as all remarkable stories in small communities do, and spread with wildfire speed. Elderly disabled veteran survives mountain storm with help from wild wolf. Nathan Sullivan lay in the ICU, surrounded by machines monitoring his vital signs. Hypothermia, dehydration, and exposure had taken their toll, but Dr. Winters had expressed cautious optimism. His core temperature has stabilized, he told Rebecca, who hadn't left the waiting room since their arrival. The next 24 hours will be critical, but Nathan's always been a fighter. Rebecca nodded, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles shone white. The intervening hours since the rescue had passed in a blur of medical terms, police interviews, and sideways glances from hospital staff who had pieced together enough of the story to form judgments. Sheriff Baker had taken her statement 3 times, each repetition more painful than the last, before reluctantly agreeing to delay any charging decisions until Nathan could provide his own account. Outside in the corridor, she could hear nurses whispering, fragments about the wolf man and left him to die, reaching her ears despite their attempts at discretion. She didn't blame them. She could barely comprehend her own actions now, viewing them through the lens of Nathan's miraculous survival. Michael Thompson entered the waiting room carrying 2 cups of coffee. His expression remained guarded, but the raw anger had subsided to something more complex. "Any change?" he asked, handing her a cup. "They're letting his sedation lighten to check his neurological status," she replied, accepting the coffee with murmured thanks. "Dr. Winters is with him now." Michael settled into the chair beside her, both of them staring at the institutional artwork on the opposite wall. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken recriminations and questions. "I need to understand, Rebecca," Michael finally said, his voice low. "We've known each other 30 years. You've been devoted to Nathan through everything. The job's dangers, losing Jason, the stroke. Why now? Why like this? Rebecca stared into her coffee, searching for words to explain the inexplicable. It wasn't one thing. It was everything. The constant care, the financial ruin, watching him suffer, losing our home. She took a shuddering breath. You don't know what it's like, Michael. Changing the diapers of a man who once carried you across mountain streams, watching his dignity strip away piece by piece. Knowing there's no end except a worse one, some sterile Medicaid facility where they'd park him in a hallway. Michael listened without interruption, his ranger's face impassive. I thought I was being merciful, she continued. Nathan talked about it sometimes, said he'd rather go out in his mountains than waste away in a bed. When the foreclosure notice came, something just broke in me. I couldn't see any other way. You could have called me, Michael said quietly. Asked for help. Rebecca laughed, a hollow sound. For what? Another mortgage we couldn't pay? Another year of watching him disappear? The system is designed to destroy families like ours, Michael. The rich get care, the rest of us get bankruptcy and heartbreak. A nurse appeared in the doorway before Michael could respond. Mrs. Sullivan, Dr. Winters would like to see you. Your husband is awake. Rebecca stood on unsteady legs, smoothing her rumpled clothes in a futile gesture. Is he? The doctor will explain everything, the nurse replied, her professional mask revealing nothing. The ICU room was dimly lit, machines creating a constellation of blinking lights around the bed. Dr. Winters stood checking an IV, his posture signaling cautious relief rather than concern, and there, propped slightly against pillows, was Nathan, pale, exhausted, but unmistakably present. Becky, he rasped, his good hand lifting slightly in greeting. She approached slowly, uncertain of her welcome. After what she'd done, what right did she have to be here? The last time she'd seen him conscious, she'd been walking away, leaving him to what she'd assumed would be certain death. His vitals are stabilizing nicely, Dr. Winters said, noting her hesitation. Remarkably little additional neurological impact, considering the circumstances. Nathan's explaining the most unusual aspects of his survival. Nathan's eyes, those familiar blue eyes that had watched her across breakfast tables for nearly 5 decades, held no condemnation, only a weary affection that broke her heart anew. Ghost, he said simply. My wolf friend. Dr. Winters made a notation on the chart. Mr. Sullivan has been describing his interaction with the wolf that apparently provided warmth during the storm and later moved him to shelter. It's unprecedented behavior for a wild predator. He's not just any wolf, Nathan said, his voice stronger now. We have history. Rebecca reached the bedside, finally daring to take his hand. It was warm now, no longer the frightening cold she'd felt in the forest. What do you mean, history? Nathan smiled faintly. Remember that wolf pup rescue about 9 years back? The illegal trap case on the north boundary? Rebecca frowned, searching her memory. Vaguely. You came home late, said something about poachers. Found a young wolf pup caught in an illegal trap, nearly dead. Got him out, patched him up, tagged him, and released him back where his pack had been spotted. Nathan's eyes took on a distant look. Never expected to see him again, especially not like this. Dr. Winters cleared his throat. Nathan believes the wolf that helped him was the same animal he rescued years ago. While I hesitate to ascribe human-like memory or motivation to wildlife, it was him, Nathan interrupted with quiet certainty. The notch in his ear, that's from the trap, and the tag's still there, just hidden by fur. He remembered me, Doc. Don't ask me how, but he did. Rebecca squeezed his hand gently. We'll talk about it later, Becky, he said softly. Right now, I'm just trying to stay awake. Doc says that's important. Dr. Winters nodded. We need to monitor his cognitive function closely, Mrs. Sullivan, perhaps just a few more minutes, then let him rest? She nodded, grateful even for this small reprieve from the reckoning she knew must come. When the doctor stepped out to give them privacy, she leaned closer to Nathan's bed. I'm so sorry, she whispered, tears welling. I never thought. I didn't know what else to do. Shh, he soothed, his speech slow but clear. The bills, the house, just things, Becky. We'd have figured something out. How can you forgive me? She asked, the question that had tormented her since seeing him alive. I left you to die. Nathan's gaze was steady, lucid despite the medication flowing into his veins. Because I understand desperation. Because 47 years means something. Because I love you, even when you make terrible decisions. His mouth quirked in a small smile. Besides, seems like you didn't succeed. God, or fate, or a wolf had other plans. A soft knock interrupted them. Sheriff Baker stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Mr. Sullivan, good to see you awake. Nathan's face hardened slightly. Jim? Come to arrest my wife? The sheriff entered, closing the door behind him. That depends entirely on your statement, Nathan. Elder abandonment is a serious charge. If you confirm that Rebecca intentionally left you in a life-threatening situation, knowing your physical limitations— Stop right there, Nathan said, his range of voice emerging despite his weakened state. What happened between me and Becky is private. I went to Oak Ridge Point of my own free will, got caught in the storm. End of story. Sheriff Baker sighed, removing his hat. Nathan, 36 search and rescue personnel heard your wife admit to leaving you there. The doctor has confirmed you couldn't have reached that location independently. I can't just ignore— You can and you will, Nathan interrupted firmly. You think a trial would help anyone? Dragging our private struggles through the mud, making an example of a woman who spent 3 years caring for me without support? The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. The law doesn't make exceptions for difficult circumstances. Then maybe the law's the problem, Nathan replied. Look at me, Jim. Really look. 3 years ago, I had a massive stroke. Insurance covered 26 days of rehab, then kicked me out. Our savings lasted 18 months. Becky's been carrying me, literally and figuratively, ever since. No respite, no help, no future except watching everything we built disappear. Rebecca stared at her husband, astonished by his defense of her actions. That doesn't justify— the sheriff began. Maybe not, Nathan conceded. But it explains, and explanations all you're getting from me. I won't press charges. I won't make a statement supporting charges. Period. Sheriff Baker studied the man before him, diminished physically but still commanding respect after decades of service to the community. Finally, he nodded. I'll need to discuss this with the DA, but without your cooperation, prosecution would be difficult. Good, Nathan said firmly. Now about Ghost. The wolf? Sheriff Baker's eyebrows rose. What about it? I don't want anyone hunting him, or the pack. They're protected anyway, but I know how these things go. Some idiot gets ideas about a dangerous predator getting too comfortable around humans. The sheriff sighed. Already fielding calls about that. Seems your wolf story has captured imaginations. The Park Service is sending a wildlife biologist to investigate. Tell them Ghost isn't dangerous, Nathan insisted. He's exceptional. I'll pass that along, Sheriff Baker promised, replacing his hat. You focus on recovering, Nathan. We'll sort the rest out later. After the sheriff departed, Rebecca sank into the chair beside Nathan's bed. "I don't deserve your protection," she whispered. "What I did was unforgivable." Nathan's eyes were growing heavy with medication and exhaustion, but his voice remained clear. "Maybe so. But forgiveness isn't about deserving, Becky. It's about choosing to move forward instead of staying stuck." As he drifted toward sleep, Rebecca remained beside him, watching the rise and fall of his chest, marveling at the inexplicable second chance they'd been given. Outside the window, darkness had fallen across the mountains, the same darkness that should have claimed Nathan's life, but had instead revealed an extraordinary connection between man and wild. 3 days later, the story of Nathan Sullivan and the wolf that saved him exploded across national media. Local coverage spread to regional outlets, then to cable news networks hungry for an uplifting human interest story. "Veteran saved by wolf he once rescued" became the headline that captured America's imagination, spawning features in major newspapers and trending across social media platforms. The hospital administrator, recognizing both the PR opportunity and the genuine public interest, arranged a brief press conference in the hospital's small auditorium. Nathan, still weak but improving daily, was wheeled to a table adorned with microphones, Rebecca beside him. Dr. Winters hovered nearby, ready to intervene if his patient showed signs of fatigue. "Mr. Sullivan, can you describe what happened when the wolf found you?" asked a reporter from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Nathan smiled slightly, now accustomed to telling the story. "I was in bad shape, cold, wet, couldn't move much. This big gray wolf just appeared out of the storm. I thought, well, this is it. But instead of attacking, he lay down beside me. Shared his body heat through the worst of the night." "And you believe this was the same wolf you rescued years ago?" a CNN correspondent pressed. "I know it was," Nathan replied firmly. "The distinctive notch in his ear from the trap injury, the way he looked at me, there was recognition there. Some people might call it coincidence, but I don't believe that." "Mrs. Sullivan," called a local reporter, "how did you feel when you found your husband alive with the wolf protecting him?" Rebecca tensed, her practiced response ready. The agreed-upon narrative, that she had left Nathan briefly to get help when they were caught in the storm, returning with the search party, was thin but had been accepted in the chaos of the remarkable wolf story. "It was the miracle I'd been praying for," she said, her voice steady despite the lie. "Seeing Nathan alive and understanding what this magnificent animal had done for him, I don't have words." More questions followed about Nathan's recovery prospects, about wolf behavior, about the future of their mountain home. Rebecca fielded those about their financial situation vaguely, not yet ready to discuss the realities waiting beyond this moment of strange celebrity. As the press conference concluded, Dr. Winters announced that his patient needed rest, and the media reluctantly dispersed. In the privacy of Nathan's hospital room, Rebecca finally allowed herself to collapse into the visitor's chair. "You did great," Nathan told her, reaching for her hand. "They bought it completely." "I hate lying," she admitted. "But I hate the alternative more." The alternative would have meant public confession, criminal charges, their private desperation splashed across headlines. With Michael's support and Nathan's refusal to cooperate with any investigation, Sheriff Baker had ultimately decided not to pursue charges, a decision helped considerably by the positive publicity surrounding Nathan's miraculous rescue. "Any word on the house?" Nathan asked, changing the subject to the more pressing reality they faced. Rebecca nodded grimly. "Foreclosure proceeds next week. I've started packing what we can store at Michael's place. He's offered his guest room until we figure something out." Nathan absorbed this with the quiet resignation he'd developed since his stroke. "Never thought we'd lose it," he said softly. "Built it with these hands." "I know." She squeezed his fingers gently. I'm looking into assisted living options. There's a place in Charlottesville that takes Medicare. 2-hour drive from the mountains, Nathan noted, gazing out the window at the Blue Ridge silhouette. Away from everything that matters. The unspoken hung between them, that her desperate act had solved nothing. The financial reality remained unchanged. The caregiving challenges would continue. The future still looked bleak, just with an added layer of guilt and secrets between them. A knock at the door interrupted their somber reflection. Michael entered, followed by a woman in her 30s wearing a Park Service uniform. "Nathan, Rebecca, this is Dr. Karen Lawson from the Wildlife Conservation Division," Michael introduced. "She's heading up the investigation into your wolf friend." Dr. Lawson stepped forward, her expression professionally curious. "Mr. Sullivan, it's an honor to meet you. Your story has created quite a stir in wildlife biology circles." Nathan nodded a greeting. "You're trying to find Ghost?" "We've set up camera traps in the area where you were found," she confirmed. "If this is indeed the same wolf you tagged years ago, it represents a remarkable case study in human-wildlife interaction." "He's not a case study," Nathan said firmly. "He's a wild animal who should be left alone." Dr. Lawson smiled diplomatically. "Of course, our interest is purely observational and protective. In fact, your story has generated significant public interest in wolf conservation. Donations to our reintroduction program have increased tenfold in the past week." Michael cleared his throat. "There's something else, Nathan." "Show him, Karen." The biologist produced a tablet and pulled up a series of night vision images. This was captured yesterday evening, about half a mile from Oak Ridge Point. The grainy green images showed a large wolf, unmistakably Ghost, standing at the forest edge, watching something off camera. The next shot revealed what had captured his attention: Park Service personnel setting up equipment. "He's monitoring us, Doctor," Lawson explained, her excitement barely contained. "Keeping his distance but observing human activity in what he clearly considers his territory. This level of calculated interaction is extraordinary." Nathan studied the images, a small smile playing at his lips. "Smart boy. Always was too curious for his own good." "There's more," Michael said, gesturing for Dr. Lawson to continue. She swiped to another series of images, these showing Ghost with 3 other wolves, 2 adults and what appeared to be a yearling. "He's not alone anymore. He's formed a new pack, or perhaps reunited with former pack members." Nathan's eyes widened. "He had been solitary. That's what saved me. A pack wolf wouldn't have approached a human." "That's what makes this so remarkable," Dr. Lawson agreed. "He appears to have rejoined social structures after your encounter. It's as if—" She hesitated, clearly reluctant to anthropomorphize. "As if saving me reminded him of his own connections," Nathan finished for her. "Doc, sometimes the simplest explanation is that animals are a hell of a lot smarter and more complex than we give them credit for." The conversation continued, with Dr. Lawson respectfully probing for details about Ghost's behavior during their time together. When she finally departed, promising to keep them updated on any sightings, Michael remained behind. "How are you really doing?" he asked Nathan once they were alone. "Physically? Better than expected. Mentally?" Nathan shrugged his good shoulder. "Processing. Everything happened so fast. Becky leaving, Ghost appearing, the rescue. Haven't had time to sort it all out yet." Michael nodded, then turned to Rebecca. "And you?" She met his gaze directly, accepting the challenge in his question. "Taking it day by day, trying to figure out our next steps once Nathan's discharged." Michael seemed to come to a decision. "I've been making some calls. There's something you both should know about." He pulled a chair closer to the bed. "Your story has touched people, more than you realize. A veterans group in Roanoke started a GoFundMe for Nathan's medical expenses. It's raised over $30,000 so far." Rebecca gasped. "30,000? And climbing," Michael confirmed. Plus, a reporter from the Washington Post is working on a feature about veterans' health care gaps, using your situation as the centerpiece. There's talk of a documentary crew interested in the wolf angle. Nathan frowned. I'm not looking to be some charity case, Michael. It's not charity, Michael insisted. It's community. The same community you served for 30 years. And it might be enough to save your house. Get some professional help for Rebecca. The possibility that something positive might emerge from their nightmare seemed too fragile to trust. Rebecca had lived so long with crushing responsibility and dwindling hope that this sudden change felt like a mirage, something that would evaporate upon closer inspection. There's something else, Michael continued, his expression softening. Dr. Lawson mentioned a potential research grant, studying the therapeutic effects of wilderness exposure on stroke recovery. They'd like you to consult, Nathan. Paid position, part-time. Me? Nathan looked genuinely surprised. What could I offer? Your experience, your connection with Ghost, your perspective as both a ranger and a stroke survivor. Michael leaned forward. It won't make you rich, but it's purpose, Nathan, and income. As the implications settled over them, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the faint stirring of hope, fragile but persistent, like a tiny flame that might, with careful tending, grow into something sustainable. We have a long way to go, she cautioned, unwilling to embrace optimism too quickly. Nathan's recovery, the house, rebuilding trust between us. One day at a time, Nathan replied, the ranger's pragmatism asserting itself. Just like on the mountain, you focus on the next step, not the whole trail. As darkness fell outside the hospital window, the three old friends continued talking about practical matters like wheelchair accessibility, about Nathan's discharge plan, about the media requests piling up. They deliberately avoided revisiting Rebecca's actions or the unspoken agreement to maintain their public story. Some wounds were too fresh, some truths too painful for direct examination. In the mountains beyond the hospital, under the same darkening sky, Ghost moved silently through his familiar territory, the new pack following his lead. Their world and the human world had touched briefly, creating ripples that would continue long after their paths diverged again. For now, both man and wolf had found their way back to their packs, survivors recognizing survivors across the ancient divide. The Sullivan house stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, its familiar creaks and groans the only sounds as Rebecca moved through the kitchen. 2 weeks had passed since Nathan's discharge from the hospital. 2 weeks of adjustments, of careful conversations that skirted the edges of what had happened, of physical therapists and home health nurses trooping through their living room. The GoFundMe had indeed saved their house, at least temporarily, the final total reaching nearly $70,000 after Nathan's story went viral. Rebecca stared out the window at the mountains barely visible in the darkness. The coffee maker gurgled behind her, its aroma filling the kitchen with normalcy that felt both comforting and fraudulent. How could anything be normal after what she'd done, after what had happened? Sleep had become her enemy. Each night brought the same dream. Nathan alone on the mountain, calling her name as she walked away. Sometimes the dream shifted, showing Ghost approaching not as savior but as predator, yellow eyes gleaming with hunger rather than recognition. She would wake gasping, reaching across the bed to touch Nathan's sleeping form, reassuring herself that he was still there, still alive, still somehow hers despite everything. The doorbell rang, startling her from her thoughts. 5:30 in the morning. Who would come calling at this hour? She hurried to answer it before the sound could wake Nathan, who needed every minute of rest his fragile body could get. Sheriff Baker stood on their porch, his cruiser parked in the driveway with lights off. His expression was grim in the porch light. "Mrs. Sullivan?" he said formally. "Sorry to disturb you so early." Need to speak with you and Nathan. Urgently. Rebecca's heart lurched. Had new evidence emerged? Had someone connected the dots? Realized the heroic wolf story was entangled with attempted abandonment? Nathan's still sleeping, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. His medication makes him— This concerns the wolf, Baker interrupted. There's been an incident. The word incident hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Rebecca stepped back, allowing him inside. I'll wake him, she said. Give me a few minutes. Nathan was already stirring when she entered their bedroom, his ranger's instincts for trouble still intact despite his physical limitations. Someone here? He asked, voice thick with sleep. Sheriff Baker, she confirmed, helping him sit up. Something about Ghost. Nathan's expression sharpened immediately. Help me dress. The process of dressing Nathan had become more efficient with practice, but it still took 15 minutes to get him from bed to wheelchair, dressed in sweatpants and a flannel shirt. When they finally joined Sheriff Baker in the living room, the coffee Rebecca had started sat cold and forgotten in the kitchen. Jim, Nathan greeted, maneuvering his wheelchair to face the sheriff directly. What's happened? Baker removed his hat, turning it in his hands. A gesture of discomfort Rebecca had seen at too many notifications of bad news during Nathan's ranger days. 3 hunters from out of state were caught in the restricted area near Oak Ridge Point last night. They had spotlights, high-powered rifles with night scopes. Ranger Patrol spotted their vehicle and investigated. Nathan's face darkened. Night hunting is illegal in those parts. It gets worse, Baker continued. When questioned, they admitted they were specifically hunting for, and I quote, that famous wolf from the news. Apparently, there's been talk in certain circles about the trophy value of the animal. Rebecca gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Nathan's face went stony, the ranger mask descending over his features. Were they successful? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Baker shook his head. No confirmation. They claim they wounded it but lost the trail in the dark. Park Service is out there now, searching for blood sign. Nathan's good hand clenched into a fist. I want to go up there. Nathan, Rebecca protested. You're barely out of the hospital. You can't. I can and I will. He cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. If Ghost is wounded out there, I need to help find him. Sheriff Baker cleared his throat. That's actually why I'm here, Nathan. Dr. Lawson specifically asked for you. She thinks if the wolf is injured but mobile, it might respond to you differently than to strangers. The terrain's rough, but they've got an ATV with a wheelchair attachment. Rebecca felt the world tilting again. Another crisis, another impossible situation. Nathan was in no condition for a search operation in the wilderness. His doctors had been clear about his limitations, about the risks of overexertion, but the determination in his eyes told her any argument would be futile. I'll get your medications, she said quietly, and some warm clothes. Within the hour they were bumping up a Forest Service road in Baker's cruiser, the first rays of dawn illuminating the autumn landscape. Nathan sat silently in the passenger seat, his expression remote, focused inward in the way Rebecca recognized from his ranger days when preparing for difficult operations. The hunters are in custody? He asked Baker, breaking the silence. Facing multiple charges, the sheriff confirmed. Hunting in a restricted area, hunting without permits, hunting with artificial light, hunting protected species. The works. Not enough, Nathan said grimly. If they've killed Ghost— He didn't finish the thought, but Rebecca, sitting in the back seat, felt a chill at his tone. This was a side of Nathan she hadn't seen since his stroke, the implacable ranger who pursued poachers and lawbreakers with single-minded determination. They arrived at a makeshift command post where several Park Service vehicles and a medical transport were parked. Dr. Lawson approached immediately, her expression strained but professional. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Sullivan," she said, then nodded to Rebecca and Sheriff Baker. We found blood sign along the ridge trail, not a lot, but enough to confirm the wolf was hit. Based on the pattern, we believe it's a shoulder wound, painful but not immediately life-threatening if treated. If, Nathan emphasized, his eyes scanning the surrounding forest. How long ago? The shot was fired approximately 9 hours ago, according to the hunter's statements. We've been tracking for about 4 hours now. The trail leads into the North Valley, then becomes sporadic. Nathan nodded, his ranger's mind assessing the information. He's moving purposefully, not randomly, heading for shelter he knows, probably the fallen pine where he took me during the storm. Dr. Lawson's eyebrows rose. That's 3 miles from here, over difficult terrain. He'll make it, Nathan said with certainty. He's tougher than people give him credit for. The process of transferring Nathan to the all-terrain vehicle was awkward, but managed with the help of 2 rangers. Rebecca watched anxiously as they secured his wheelchair to the specially designed attachment, testing the restraints twice before pronouncing it safe. "I'm coming too," she said, stepping forward. Nathan looked up, surprised. "Becky, this is going to be rough going. You don't have to—" "I'm coming," she repeated firmly. "I owe him too." No one argued. Rebecca climbed onto the back of the ATV behind the ranger who would drive, and they set off, following flagging tape that marked the blood trail. Sheriff Baker remained at the command post, coordinating with additional search teams being deployed along likely routes. The journey was punishing, jolting over exposed roots, navigating around fallen trees, climbing inclines that made the ATV's engine strain. Nathan endured it stoically, his focus entirely on the search. Occasionally, he would signal a stop, studying the ground or sniffing the air in a way that reminded Rebecca forcefully of Ghost himself. 2 hours into the search, with the sun now fully risen above the mountains, they reached a small stream cutting across their path. The ATV could cross, but with difficulty. As they paused to assess the best route, Nathan suddenly held up his hand. "Wait," he said sharply. "Listen." Everyone fell silent. At first, Rebecca heard nothing but the burbling stream and bird calls. Then, faint but distinct, a low whine carried on the breeze. "There," Nathan pointed toward a thicket of rhododendron about 50 yards upstream. "He's there." Dr. Lawson raised her binoculars, scanning the dense foliage. "I don't see anything." "Trust me," Nathan insisted. "I know his voice. That's him." The ranger driving the ATV looked to Dr. Lawson for direction. She hesitated, then nodded. "Let's check it out. But carefully. A wounded predator is unpredictable." They approached slowly, the ATV crawling over the uneven ground. As they drew closer, the whining became more distinct, a sound of pain that raised goosebumps on Rebecca's arms. Then, through a gap in the foliage, she saw it. A flash of gray fur, matted with dark blood. "Ghost," Nathan called softly. "It's okay, boy. We're here to help." The whining stopped abruptly. The rhododendron rustled and Ghost emerged, moving stiffly, his left shoulder darkened with blood, his yellow eyes alert but clouded with pain. He stopped when he saw the group, hackles rising slightly. "Everyone stay back," Nathan instructed. "Let me talk to him." "Talk to him?" one of the rangers muttered skeptically. "Just watch," Rebecca said quietly. Nathan wheeled himself forward, moving away from the ATV under his own power, his right arm working the wheel with practiced strength. Ghost watched his approach, ears forward, body tense but not aggressive. "Remember me, Ghost?" Nathan said, his voice gentle. "You saved my life. Now I'm here to return the favor." The wolf's posture changed subtly, head lowering, ears relaxing. He took a tentative step forward, then another, limping heavily on his injured leg. Dr. Lawson watched in astonishment. "This is unprecedented," she whispered. "He should be retreating, not approaching." Ghost stopped about 10 feet from Nathan's wheelchair, swaying slightly from weakness and blood loss. His intelligent eyes moved from Nathan to the others, then back again, clearly assessing the situation. "He needs medical attention," Nathan said without turning. "Karen, what's your plan?" Dr. Lawson stepped forward slowly, keeping her movements deliberate. "We need to tranquilize him. Transport him to the Wildlife Veterinary Center in Charlottesville. The shoulder wound needs cleaning and assessment. He may need surgery." Nathan nodded. "He won't let you dart him while he's conscious. Too smart for that." He looked directly at Ghost. "But I think he'll let me get closer, maybe close enough to administer a sedative by hand." "That's extremely dangerous," Dr. Lawson protested. "Even with your history, he's a wild animal in pain. The risk is mine to take," Nathan finished firmly. "Get the sedative ready. Something you can deliver by hand injection, and move back, all of you. Your presence is making him nervous." Rebecca felt her heart rate accelerate. "Nathan, please." "It's okay, Becky," he assured her, his eyes still on Ghost. "He won't hurt me. We understand each other." Dr. Lawson hesitated, then motioned for her team to retreat to the ATV. She removed a prepared syringe from her medical kit and cautiously approached Nathan, placing it in his outstretched hand. "Intramuscular injection," she instructed quietly. "Upper hind leg is best if you can manage it. The dose is calibrated for his estimated weight." Nathan nodded, tucking the syringe into his shirt pocket. "Everyone back now. Give us space." Rebecca moved away with the others, her throat tight with fear. She had already nearly lost Nathan once on these mountains. Now he was putting himself at risk again for the very creature that had saved him from her terrible decision. Alone now, Nathan began speaking to Ghost in a low, soothing voice, the words indistinct at this distance, but the tone unmistakably calming. Inch by inch, he wheeled himself closer to the injured wolf. Ghost remained still, watching, occasionally shifting his weight off the injured leg. When Nathan was just 5 feet away, Ghost did something that drew gasps from the watching team. He lay down, his body language one of submission or trust. Nathan continued forward until he was close enough to touch the massive predator. "My God," Dr. Lawson breathed. "I wouldn't believe it if I wasn't seeing it." Nathan's hand extended slowly, palm down in a non-threatening gesture. Ghost sniffed it once, then allowed Nathan to gently touch his head. For several minutes, Nathan simply stroked the wolf's fur, murmuring to him, building trust. Then, with a smoothness that belied his paralysis, Nathan reached for the syringe while continuing to pet the wolf with his other hand. Ghost tensed slightly at the movement but didn't retreat. "He's going to do it," Rebecca whispered, hardly daring to breathe. With precise movements, Nathan uncapped the syringe, leaned forward in his wheelchair, and quickly administered the injection into Ghost's hind quarter. The wolf jerked in surprise, a growl starting low in his throat, but Nathan continued speaking in that same soothing tone. After a tense moment, Ghost settled again, though his eyes now showed confusion as the sedative began to take effect. "It's working," Dr. Lawson confirmed, watching through her binoculars. "He's getting drowsy." Within minutes, Ghost's massive head had lowered to his paws, his eyes struggling to remain open. Finally, he slipped into unconsciousness, his breathing deep and regular. Nathan signaled the team forward. "He's out," he called. "Move quickly." The wildlife team sprang into action with practiced efficiency. They examined the wound, a bullet graze across the shoulder, painful but not catastrophic, applied a pressure bandage, and prepared Ghost for transport. The tranquilized wolf was carefully lifted onto a specialized stretcher, his vital signs monitored continuously. As they secured Ghost to the transport ATV, Rebecca approached Nathan, who sat watching the proceedings with an intensity that spoke of his emotional investment. "You did it," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Nathan covered her hand with his own. "He trusted me. After everything humans have done to him, the trap, the bullet, he still trusted me." The unspoken parallel hung between them. After what Rebecca had done to Nathan, he had similarly chosen trust over resentment. The weight of that grace pressed on her heart. "What happens now?" she asked. Dr. Lawson approached, having overheard the question. "We'll transport him to the Wildlife Veterinary Center. The wound will be properly cleaned and treated. He'll stay under observation until he's strong enough for release." "And then?" Nathan pressed. The biologist hesitated. "That's the complicated part. Once this story gets out, a wolf being hunted specifically because of his connection to you, there will be concerns about his safety in the wild. Some will argue he should be relocated far from human contact." Nathan's expression darkened. "This is his territory. His pack is here." "I understand your concern," Dr. Lawson said diplomatically, "but we have to consider what's best for the animal's survival." "Relocating him isn't what's best," Nathan insisted. "He's not just any wolf. He's adapted to this specific ecosystem, these mountains. His pack depends on his leadership." Dr. Lawson didn't argue further, recognizing the depth of Nathan's conviction. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, let's focus on getting him treated." As they prepared to depart, a commotion at the perimeter of the clearing drew everyone's attention. 3 wolves, the pack members from the trail camera footage, had appeared at the forest edge, watching the activity around their fallen alpha with wary attention. "Nobody move," Dr. Lawson instructed. "Let them observe. They need to understand we're not hurting him." The wolves maintained their distance, but their presence was unmistakable, a silent vigil for their leader. As Ghost was carefully loaded for transport, the pack melted back into the forest, disappearing as silently as they had come. "They'll follow," Nathan said with certainty. "Not closely enough to be seen, but they'll track him. Pack doesn't abandon pack." The journey back to the command post was slower, the team careful not to jostle their unconscious patient. Rebecca watched Nathan's face as they traveled, noting the exhaustion etching deeper lines around his eyes and mouth. The expedition had taxed his limited strength, but she knew better than to suggest he should have stayed behind. At the command post, Ghost was transferred to a specialized wildlife transport vehicle. Nathan insisted on seeing him settled before he would allow himself to be helped back into Sheriff Baker's cruiser. "I want updates," he told Dr. Lawson. "Every step of his treatment, his recovery, and I want to be consulted before any decisions are made about his release." The biologist nodded, respecting his authority on the subject. "I'll call you personally with reports. And Nathan, what you did today, that connection you have with him, it's extraordinary. I've worked with wolves for 15 years and never seen anything like it." As they drove back down the mountain, Nathan grew quiet, the adrenaline of the search and rescue fading to reveal his physical exhaustion. Rebecca watched him from the back seat, concern and love mingling with the ever-present guilt that now colored their relationship. "You need rest," she said gently when they arrived home. "Today was too much, too soon after your hospitalization." Nathan didn't argue, allowing her to help him from the car to his wheelchair, then inside to their bedroom. The process of getting him settled, changing clothes, arranging pillows to prevent pressure sores, administering medications, had become second nature to Rebecca. But today, each touch, each act of care felt weighted with new significance. When Nathan was finally settled in bed, Rebecca sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. "Why did you defend me to Sheriff Baker?" she asked, the question that had haunted her since his hospital room confrontation. "After what I did, leaving you on that mountain, why protect me from the consequences?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on their joined hands. "Because punishment wouldn't solve anything," he finally said. "Putting you in jail wouldn't fix what's broken in us, in the system that drove us to that point. But I deserve— What do any of us deserve, Becky? He interrupted gently. Did I deserve a stroke that took half my body? Did you deserve to become an unpaid nurse at 65? Did Ghost deserve to be shot for the crime of saving my life? She had no answer for these questions. Life isn't about deserving, Nathan continued, his voice growing weaker with fatigue. It's about choices. You made a terrible choice on that mountain, but you came back. You faced what you'd done. Now we have to decide where to go from here. Rebecca felt tears welling. I don't know if I can forgive myself, even if you forgive me. Then that's your next challenge, Nathan said, his eyes drifting closed. Because I need you, Becky, not just as my caregiver, as my wife, my partner. And I can't help you carry your guilt along with everything else. As Nathan slipped into exhausted sleep, Rebecca remained beside him, his words echoing in her mind. The weight of what she'd done, the betrayal of their life's covenant, pressed down on her, seemingly undiminishable despite Nathan's forgiveness. How could she continue as his wife, his caretaker, knowing what she was capable of in a moment of desperation? Outside their window, the mountain forest stretched away toward the ridgeline where Ghost had saved Nathan, where Rebecca had left him, where all their lives had irrevocably changed. Somewhere in that wilderness, Ghost's pack waited for their leader's return, faithful despite separation, trusting in a bond that transcended temporary absence. Pack doesn't abandon pack. Nathan's words about the wolves seemed directed at her as well, a reminder of commitment that endured beyond momentary failure. But could she be as faithful as those wolves, as forgiving as Nathan, as resilient as Ghost? The question lingered unanswered as darkness fell across the mountains, bringing no resolution, only the heavy silence of unresolved grief. 3 weeks after Ghost's injury, the media frenzy had transformed from a local human interest story into a national conversation. The Washington Post feature had run on the front page of the Sunday edition. The Veteran and the Wolf, a story of reciprocal rescue, complete with dramatic photos of Nathan in his ranger days and wildlife camera shots of Ghost. Cable news networks had picked up the story, spinning it according to their particular slants, some focusing on veterans' healthcare failures, others on the environmental angle, still others on the emotional connection between species. The Sullivans' phone rang constantly, despite their unlisted number changing twice. Film crews parked at the end of their driveway until Sheriff Baker established a perimeter. Interview requests piled up, from morning shows, documentary filmmakers, book publishers. The modest GoFundMe had ballooned to over $200,000 as the story spread, managed now by a local attorney who volunteered his services to protect the couple from financial exploitation. Through it all, Nathan and Rebecca maintained their carefully constructed narrative: the storm, the separation, the miraculous intervention of Ghost. The truth remained their private burden, unspoken even between themselves as they navigated the unexpected consequences of their sudden fame. The CNN crew is leaving tomorrow, Rebecca told Nathan as she helped him into his wheelchair for his morning therapy session. Sheriff Baker says the Discovery Channel people have permits through Friday, then they're done too. Nathan nodded absently, his attention on the tablet in his lap. Karen sent new pictures of Ghost. The stitches are out. He's moving better? Rebecca leaned over his shoulder to see the images. Ghost in a large enclosure at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, his coat regaining its luster, the wound on his shoulder healing cleanly. His yellow eyes stared directly into the camera with the same unnerving intelligence they had witnessed in person. "When will they release him?" she asked, adjusting the blanket over Nathan's legs. "That's become complicated," Nathan replied, his expression darkening. "The Fish and Wildlife Service is involved now. There's debate about whether he's too habituated to humans to return to the wild." The injustice of this struck Rebecca forcefully. Because he saved you? That's not habituation, that's something else entirely. I know. Nathan set the tablet aside with a sigh. Karen's fighting for him. Says his behavior with me was an anomaly, not a pattern. But there are concerns about trophy hunters targeting him again. The physical therapist arrived before they could discuss it further, a young man named Jason who shared Nathan's love of the outdoors and had a gift for pushing him just enough without causing setbacks. Rebecca left them to their work, retreating to the kitchen where bills and paperwork awaited. The financial landscape had changed dramatically since Nathan's rescue. The GoFundMe money had paid off their medical debt and saved the house from foreclosure, with enough remaining to cover a year of professional home care assistance. Nathan's consulting position with the Wildlife Research Grant provided modest but steady income. For the first time in years, Rebecca could open the mail without dread. Yet the relief of financial stability didn't address the deeper fractures in their relationship. Nathan's forgiveness, so freely given, sometimes felt to Rebecca like an additional burden rather than absolution. How could she accept it when she hadn't forgiven herself? How could they rebuild trust when the foundation had been so profoundly damaged? She was sorting through insurance paperwork when a knock at the back door startled her. Michael Thompson stood on the porch, holding a casserole dish. "Tuna noodle," he said when she opened the door. "Figured with all the commotion out front you might appreciate a backdoor delivery." Rebecca managed to smile, stepping aside to let him in. "You're a lifesaver. I haven't had time to cook with everything." Her voice trailed off. Michael had been a constant presence since Nathan's rescue, helping with household repairs, driving him to medical appointments, running interference with the media. But there remained an unspoken tension between him and Rebecca, a wariness in his manner that told her his forgiveness, unlike Nathan's, came with conditions. "How is he today?" Michael asked, setting the casserole on the counter. "Better?" "The new medication is helping with the spasticity in his left leg. Jason thinks he might be able to stand unassisted within a month." Michael nodded, leaning against the counter. "And Ghost?" "Still at the rehabilitation center. There's some debate about his release." A shadow crossed Michael's weathered face. "Punishing the wolf for being too good at adapting. Typical bureaucratic thinking." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the ease of their decades-long friendship still absent. Rebecca busied herself finding a place for the casserole in the crowded refrigerator. "Rebecca," Michael finally said, his voice deliberately gentle, "there's something we need to discuss." She tensed, closing the refrigerator door slowly. "What is it?" "I've been in touch with a journalist from the Times, a serious investigative reporter, not one of these feature writers looking for heartwarming animal stories. She's working on a piece about caregiver burden, the physical, emotional, and financial toll of caring for disabled family members without adequate support." Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. "Why are you telling me this?" Michael held her gaze steadily. "Because she wants to interview you about what really happened on that mountain." The room seemed to tilt around her. "Michael, we agreed to protect you from criminal charges," he interrupted firmly, "not to bury the truth forever. This reporter isn't interested in sensationalizing what happened. She wants to examine the systemic failures that pushed you to that breaking point." Rebecca sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. "Does Nathan know you're suggesting this?" "Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first." "It would destroy everything," she whispered. The public support, Nathan's consulting position, all of it built on the story everyone believes. Michael sat across from her, his expression softening. "Or it could help thousands of other caregivers in your position. Make people understand there's a reason elder abandonment happens. Not because of cruelty, but because of a system that abandons the caregivers first." The possibility hung in the air between them, that her darkest action might serve some greater purpose, that her shame might become a catalyst for change. but the risk was enormous. "I can't make this decision alone," she said finally. "I need to talk to Nathan." Michael nodded, rising to leave. "Think about it. Both of you. The reporter is willing to work with you. Pseudonyms, location changes, whatever protections you need. But your story, the real story, needs to be told." After he departed, Rebecca remained at the kitchen table, mind racing. The carefully constructed narrative they'd maintained since Nathan's rescue had become their reality in the public eye. Dismantling it would mean facing not only potential legal consequences, but also the judgment of thousands who had embraced their sanitized story. When Jason the therapist left an hour later, Rebecca found Nathan in the living room, his face flushed with the effort of his exercises, but his eyes brighter than they'd been in days. "2 steps, Becky," he announced proudly. "Supported, but 2 actual steps." She smiled, genuinely happy for this small victory. "That's wonderful. I knew you could do it." She settled beside his wheelchair, gathering her courage. "Michael was here earlier. He brought dinner, but also a proposition." Nathan listened without interruption as she explained Michael's suggestion about the journalist. When she finished, he sat in thoughtful silence, gazing out the window toward the mountains that had nearly claimed his life. "What do you think?" she finally asked, unable to bear the silence. "I think," he said slowly, "that we've been living 2 stories since that day. The public one, heroic wolf saves abandoned man, and the private one we don't discuss, even between ourselves." Rebecca flinched at the gentle directness of his words. It was true. They had carefully avoided any deep discussion of her actions that day, of what had driven her to such desperation, of how it had changed them both. "If we do this," Nathan continued, "there's no going back. The world will know what actually happened, that you left me there to die." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I can't make this decision alone." Nathan turned his wheelchair to face her fully. "Then let's finally talk about it. The real story, Becky. All of it." The moment hung between them, an invitation to excavate what they had carefully buried beneath gratitude for survival and the distractions of newfound fame. Rebecca felt her chest tighten with fear, but also with a strange relief. Perhaps this conversation was long overdue. "I wasn't just overwhelmed by the caregiving," she began hesitantly. "It was watching you disappear piece by piece. Your dignity, your independence, your joy, everything that made you Nathan, slipping away while I stood by, helpless to stop it." Once started, the words came faster, years of unspoken pain finding release. She described the isolation, the financial terror, the physical exhaustion, the grief for the future they'd planned together. How each morning she would wake, hoping for the strength to face another day, only to find her reserves depleted further. "The foreclosure notice was just the final straw," she admitted. "I'd been thinking about Oak Ridge Point for months. How peaceful it would be for you there, surrounded by the mountains you loved instead of sterilized hospital corridors." Nathan listened intently, his own eyes filling with tears as she spoke. When she finally fell silent, emotionally spent, he reached for her hand. "My turn," he said quietly. "I knew what you were doing that day. Not just suspected. Knew. I saw it in your eyes when you packed my warmest clothes, when you left my medications behind." Rebecca gasped. "You knew, and you still went with me?" He nodded slowly. "Because part of me wanted exactly what you were offering. An end on my own terms, in my place, not theirs. The ranger in me knew I wouldn't survive the night, especially with that storm coming, and I had made peace with that." The revelation stunned her. All this time, she had carried the full weight of guilt, never imagining Nathan had been a knowing participant in his own abandonment. But then Ghost appeared, Nathan continued, his voice softening with wonder even now. And suddenly, I wanted to live again. Not just survive. Live. Fight. Find a way forward, even with half my body betraying me. He squeezed her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. The story isn't just about you leaving me there, Becky. It's about a healthcare system that bankrupts families. It's about how we discard the elderly and disabled. It's about caregiver burnout that no one acknowledges until it's too late. And yes, it's about an extraordinary wolf who somehow remembered a kindness from years ago. Rebecca wiped at her tears, considering his words. If we tell the real story, the complete story, what happens to us? Legally, financially, personally? I don't know, Nathan admitted. But living with this secret is its own kind of prison, for both of us. They sat together in the fading afternoon light, the weight of decision heavy between them. Outside, a news van packed up equipment, heading back to whatever assignment would replace their story in the relentless cycle of media attention. What if we tell our story? Rebecca suggested hesitantly. But on our terms. Not through some journalist looking for an exposé, but in our own words. Nathan considered this. You mean write it ourselves? Or find someone we trust to help us tell it honestly? Maybe both. We could work with this reporter Michael mentioned, but maintain some control. Include all of it. The caregiving struggles, the financial disaster, the impossible choices. Not to excuse what I did, but to explain the context. The idea seemed to energize Nathan. And we could use it to advocate for real change. Better support for home caregivers, health care reform, more humane options for end-of-life care. For the first time in weeks, Rebecca felt something like hope stirring. Not the temporary relief of their financial rescue, but something more substantial. A purpose emerging from their darkest chapter. I'll talk to Michael, she decided. Ask him to arrange a meeting with this journalist. No commitments yet, just a conversation about possibilities. Nathan nodded, then grew serious again. Before we do this, Becky, I need to know something. Do you regret coming back for me? Not just because of how it turned out, but in that moment, when you were driving away, did you ever consider not telling anyone, just letting nature take its course? The question pierced her to the core, direct, unflinching, essential. She owed him complete honesty now. Yes, she admitted, her voice barely audible. For about 20 minutes. I drove down the mountain thinking it was over, that your suffering was ending, that maybe mine would too. She drew a shaky breath. Then I pulled over and vomited on the side of the road, and I knew I couldn't live with what I'd done. I was going to Michael's house to confess everything when he called me. Nathan absorbed this, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a small, sad smile, but genuine. Thank you for telling me the truth. All of it. Does it change how you feel about me? She asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know. No, he said simply. Because I already knew. I've known you 47 years, Becky. I know your darkest thoughts just as you know mine. What matters isn't that you had the thought, it's that you rejected it. That evening, as Rebecca prepared dinner with the casserole Michael had brought, her phone chimed with a text message. It was from Dr. Lawson, sent to both her and Nathan. Decision made. Ghost to be released tomorrow at dawn. Nathan invited to attend if health permits. Limited personnel only. No media. She hurried to show Nathan, who was watching the evening news with the volume low. They're letting him go, she said excitedly. Karen says you can be there. Nathan's face lit up with the first uncomplicated joy she'd seen since before his stroke. Tomorrow. I need to be there, Becky. It's a 3-hour drive to the rehabilitation center, then who knows how far to the release site, she cautioned. Are you sure you're strong enough? I have to be, he said with quiet determination. "I need to see him go home." They spent the evening making preparations, charging the portable oxygen concentrator, packing medications, arranging Nathan's wheelchair van that had been part of their GoFundMe windfall. Rebecca called Michael, who immediately offered to drive them, having more experience with the specialized vehicle than she did. As they worked, the tension that had existed between them since their conversation seemed to ease, replaced by a shared purpose. This journey to witness ghosts return to the wild felt symbolic, an ending, but also a beginning. They left at 3 a.m., driving through darkness with Michael at the wheel and Nathan dozing in his secured wheelchair in the back. Rebecca sat beside Michael, watching the night landscape slide past, remembering a similar drive weeks ago with very different intentions. "Did you talk about the interview?" Michael asked quietly, mindful of Nathan sleeping behind them. "We did," Rebecca confirmed. "Not just the interview, everything. The whole truth, finally laid bare between us." Michael glanced at her, his expression softening. "And we're considering telling our story, the real story, but carefully, with purpose beyond just confession." He nodded, returning his attention to the dark road. "That takes courage." "I don't feel courageous," she admitted, "just tired of carrying secrets." They arrived at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center as the first gray light of dawn seeped into the sky. "Doctor." Lawson met them in the parking area, her expression professional but her eyes betraying excitement. "He's ready," she told Nathan, gesturing to a specialized transport vehicle nearby. "We're releasing him at a location about 20 minutes from here, close enough to his territory that he can find his way home, but far enough from roads to give him a safer start." "How is he?" Nathan asked as Michael helped him transfer to his regular wheelchair. "Strong, fully recovered from the wound, and very ready to be free again." Dr. Lawson smiled slightly. "He's been increasingly restless the past few days, as if he knows something is changing." They followed the transport vehicle in a small convoy, just 2 park service trucks and their van, up a narrow forest road that eventually became too rough for Nathan's wheelchair. Without hesitation, Michael and one of the rangers lifted Nathan from his chair and carried him the final 100 yards to a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. Rebecca followed with a blanket which they arranged on a fallen log for Nathan to sit on. The early morning air was crisp with autumn chill, mist rising from the valley below as the sun's first rays touched the mountain ridges. The transport cage containing Ghost was carefully unloaded and placed at the clearing's edge, positioned so that when opened, the wolf would head away from the humans and into the forest. Dr. Lawson approached Nathan, who sat bundled against the cold, his eyes fixed on the cage. "Would you like to be the one to open it?" she asked quietly. Nathan looked surprised. "Is that allowed?" "Not typically," she admitted. "But nothing about this case has been typical. I've cleared it with my superiors. If you feel strong enough to move to the cage, you can release the mechanism." Michael and Rebecca exchanged glances, both concerned about Nathan's stability, but neither willing to deny him this moment. Carefully, they helped him stand and walk the short distance to the transport cage, supporting him on either side. Through the bars, Ghost was clearly visible, alert, tense, his yellow eyes fixed on Nathan with unmistakable recognition. He made no sound, but his attention never wavered from the man who approached. "Hey, Ghost," Nathan said softly when they reached the cage. "Ready to go home?" The wolf's ears pricked forward at the sound of his voice. Dr. Lawson showed Nathan how to operate the release mechanism, a simple latch that would allow the front panel to swing open. "Everyone else, please step back," she instructed. "Nathan, once you release the latch, move back as quickly as you can with your assistance." When everyone was in position, Nathan took a deep breath and released the latch. The cage door swung open smoothly, revealing the path to freedom. Ghost didn't move immediately. He remained inside, his gaze still fixed on Nathan, who was now being supported a few feet away by Michael and Rebecca. "Go on, boy," Nathan encouraged. "Your pack is waiting for you." Still, the wolf hesitated. Then, in a movement that drew gasps from the observers, he stepped out of the cage and approached Nathan directly. Dr. Lawson tensed, but didn't intervene, recognizing the unique bond between them. Ghost stopped just 2 feet from Nathan, close enough that his wild scent, pine and musk and something indefinably primal, enveloped them. For a long moment, man and wolf regarded each other, yellow eyes meeting blue in a connection that transcended species. Then Ghost did something extraordinary. He lowered his massive head in what appeared to be a gesture of farewell, held Nathan's gaze for one final moment, then turned and loped into the forest. Within seconds, his silver-gray form had vanished among the trees, leaving only disturbed underbrush as evidence of his passing. "Remarkable," Dr. Lawson breathed. "I've never seen anything like it." Nathan's legs trembled with the effort of standing, but his face shone with a joy that transformed him. "Goodbye, old friend," he whispered toward the empty forest. "Live well." As Michael and Rebecca helped Nathan back to his seat on the log, a sound rose from the distant forest, a long, undulating howl that echoed across the valley. Then, incredibly, it was joined by others, 3, perhaps 4 wolves calling in chorus. "His pack," Dr. Lawson confirmed, listening intently. "They've been waiting for him. That's why we chose this location. Our tracking data showed pack activity in this range." The howling continued for nearly a minute, a wild symphony that raised goosebumps on Rebecca's arms. When it finally faded, the forest seemed to settle back into ordinary morning sounds: birdsong, rustling leaves, the distant gurgle of a stream. "He's home," Nathan said simply, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered cheeks. "Truly home." As they made their way back to the van, Nathan leaning heavily on his supporters, Rebecca felt something shift within her, a weight lifting, a corner turned. Ghost had found his way back to his pack, his true place in the world. Perhaps they too could find their way forward from the darkness of recent months. In the van, as Michael navigated the winding road back toward civilization, Nathan reached for Rebecca's hand across the space between them. "I've made a decision," he said, his voice steady despite his physical exhaustion. "About telling our story." She waited, sensing the importance of his words. "Let's do it," he continued. "The full truth, no matter the consequences. If Ghost can find his way home after everything he's endured, maybe our story can help others find their way too." Rebecca squeezed his hand, feeling for the first time that the path ahead, though difficult, was at least visible now. "Together then," she agreed, "the whole truth." Outside the van windows, the mountains of Virginia rolled away in ancient waves, unchanged by the small human dramas played out upon them. Somewhere in those forests, Ghost ran free with his pack, his brief intersection with human lives already fading into the larger rhythm of wilderness. But the ripples of that intersection would continue to spread, touching lives far beyond the mountain valleys where a wolf had once saved a man who had once saved him. 3 months after Ghost's release, winter had descended on the Blue Ridge Mountains, transforming the landscape into a monochrome world of white and gray. Inside the Sullivan home, however, warmth and purpose had returned after years of absence. The living room had been rearranged to accommodate Nathan's therapy equipment: parallel bars, resistance bands, and a specialized treadmill purchased with GoFundMe money. The walls, once barren except for old family photos, now displayed framed newspaper articles and wildlife photographs documenting their extraordinary story. The most prominent was a large, professionally matted print from a trail camera, Ghost standing alert at the edge of a clearing, 3 members of his pack visible in the background. The image had been captured just 2 weeks after his release, confirming his successful reintegration. Doctor. Lawson sent monthly updates on the PAC's movements, carefully tracked through non-invasive monitoring systems established throughout their territory. Nathan sat at the kitchen table, his wheelchair pushed aside in favor of a regular chair. 6 months of intensive physical therapy had yielded remarkable progress. He could now walk short distances with a cane, dress himself with minimal assistance, and had regained limited function in his left hand. The improvement wasn't miraculous. He would never again hike mountain trails or split firewood, but it represented a level of independence neither he nor Rebecca had thought possible after his stroke. The publisher called again, Rebecca said, pouring coffee into his favorite mug, a new one featuring a silhouette of a wolf against a full moon. They want to move up the release date. Apparently, pre-orders are exceeding their projections. Nathan accepted the coffee with a small smile. Imagine that. 2 old mountain folk with a bestseller. The book had been their compromise between silence and full public confession. Working with a respected journalist recommended by Michael, they had written their complete story, including Rebecca's desperate decision at Oak Ridge Point. The manuscript, titled The Wolf at the Door, a story of desperation, survival, and second chances, had sparked a bidding war among publishers, eventually selling for an advance that ensured their financial security for the foreseeable future. More importantly, the writing process had become a form of therapy, allowing them to examine the systemic failures that had pushed them to the breaking point. The final manuscript pulled no punches, detailing the crushing medical debt, the inadequate support for home caregivers, the impossible choices facing families caring for disabled loved ones, and yes, the moment when Rebecca's desperation had led to an unthinkable act. The 60 Minutes producer confirmed for next week, Rebecca continued, consulting the calendar she now maintained for their increasingly public lives. They want to film here and at Oak Ridge Point if you're up for the hike. Nathan's expression turned thoughtful. I think I am, actually. With the new leg brace and my cane, I could make it part way. Enough for them to get their dramatic footage. Rebecca studied him over her coffee cup, noting the healthy color in his cheeks, the alert brightness in his eyes that had been absent for so long. The physical improvements were significant, but the psychological transformation was even more profound. Having a purpose, advocating for caregiver support and healthcare reform, had restored something essential in Nathan that his stroke had stolen. "The mail came while you were doing your exercises," she said, pushing a thick envelope across the table. "From Senator Warner's office." Nathan opened it carefully with his partially functional left hand, another small victory in his ongoing recovery. Inside was an official invitation to testify before a Senate committee on elder care and caregiver support. "Washington," he murmured, scanning the letter. "They want both of us. To put a face on the crisis, they say." Rebecca felt a flutter of anxiety. Their story had indeed resonated far beyond what they'd anticipated. The early excerpts from their book published in The Atlantic had gone viral, spawning a national conversation about caregiver syndrome and the moral complexities surrounding end-of-life care. But appearing before Congress would take their advocacy to another level entirely. "Are we ready for that kind of exposure?" she asked. "It's one thing to tell our story in a book, another to face questions from senators." Nathan reached across the table to take her hand. "We've faced worse than politicians, Becky." "Much worse." The gentle humor in his voice made her smile despite her concerns. This too was new, the ability to acknowledge the darkness of what had happened without being consumed by it. Their story had become exactly what they'd hoped, not just a confession, but a catalyst for change. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Michael Thompson entered, stamping snow from his boots before stepping inside. His visits had become regular again, the old friendship restored through their shared journey of the past months. "Mail call," he announced, holding up a small package. "From Dr. Lawson. Thought you'd want it right away." Nathan accepted the package eagerly. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. He passed the note to Rebecca, who read it aloud. Nathan and Rebecca. Thought you'd appreciate this footage from our newest camera station. Someone's keeping an eye on his territory. Remarkable behavior continues. Karen. Michael helped Nathan transfer the video file to their television. The three of them watched in silence as the night vision footage played. A mountain trail dusted with snow. Date stamp showing it was recorded just 3 days earlier. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then Ghost appeared, trotting purposefully along the trail. He paused directly in front of the camera, raising his head as if scenting the air, yellow eyes gleaming in the infrared light. After a moment he continued on his way, disappearing from frame. "He looks good," Nathan said softly. "Healthy, strong." "The location is interesting," Michael noted, rewinding to check the GPS coordinates embedded in the footage. "That's less than 2 miles from your property line, closest he's come to human habitation since his release." Rebecca felt a strange shiver of recognition. "He's patrolling, checking boundaries." "Checking on us, more likely," Nathan corrected gently. "Making sure his humans are okay." The idea should have seemed fanciful, a projection of human motivation onto a wild animal, but after everything they had experienced, none of them dismissed it outright. Ghost had defied conventional wildlife behavior repeatedly. This was merely the latest example. "The biologists are publishing a paper about him," Michael said, accepting the coffee Rebecca offered. "Karen says he's rewriting their understanding of wolf cognition and memory. Apparently, his behavior suggests recognition and reciprocity at levels previously undocumented in wild canids." Nathan smiled at the scientific language attempting to quantify what he knew intuitively, that the connection between him and Ghost transcended easy categorization. "Speaking of recognition," Michael continued, "the mayor called me this morning. The town council unanimously approved the proposal. They're breaking ground on the Sullivan Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in the spring." This was another unexpected outcome of their story. The remaining GoFundMe money, combined with grants and community donations, had funded a small wildlife rehabilitation facility specializing in predator species. Located on land donated by the National Forest Service, the center would focus on treating injured wildlife with the goal of releasing them back into their natural habitats. "I still think it should be called the Ghost Center," Nathan said, the familiar argument bringing smiles to all their faces. "Nobody would know what that means except us," Rebecca reminded him, clearing away the coffee cups. "Besides, you're the one who taught Ghost to trust humans in the first place. The name is appropriate." As Michael and Nathan continued discussing plans for the rehabilitation center, Rebecca moved to the living room window, gazing out at the snow-covered mountains. So much had changed in the months since that desperate day at Oak Ridge Point. The house was secure, Nathan was improving, their story was helping others facing similar struggles. The system itself remained broken, medical costs still ruinous, support for caregivers still inadequate. But their advocacy was helping to spotlight these issues for a national audience. And Rebecca herself had changed most of all. The crushing guilt that had once threatened to consume her had gradually transformed into something more constructive, a fierce determination to prevent others from reaching the breaking point she had experienced. The support groups she now led for caregivers had become a lifeline, not just for the participants, but for Rebecca herself, a community of understanding built around shared struggles. Nathan joined her at the window, his cane tapping softly on the hardwood floor. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. "Just thinking about how far we've come," she replied, "how close we came to losing everything. And instead, we found something new." Nathan's gaze followed hers to the distant mountains. "Not the life we planned, but still ours," she finished for him. still worth fighting for. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as fresh snow began to fall, adding another layer to the pristine blanket covering their yard. Somewhere in those mountains, Ghost and his pack were hunting, surviving, thriving, wild and free, yet connected to the human world through bonds of memory and reciprocal rescue. The Senate hearing took place on a crisp March morning, the Capitol gleaming white against a clear blue sky. Rebecca and Nathan had arrived in Washington 2 days earlier, staying in a wheelchair-accessible hotel suite arranged by Senator Warner's staff. The trip had been exhausting for Nathan, but he had insisted on making it without postponement, recognizing the momentum building around their story and the legislation it had inspired. The hearing room was smaller than Rebecca had imagined from television, but impressively formal with its polished wood and Senate seals. Camera crews lined the back wall, and every seat in the public gallery was filled, a mix of policy advocates, healthcare professionals, and families with their own caregiver stories. Nathan sat at the witness table in his wheelchair, a concession to the long day ahead rather than necessity, with Rebecca beside him. They had dressed formally, Nathan in a suit that hung slightly loose on his still-recovering frame, Rebecca in a simple navy dress that Michael's daughter had helped her select. They looked, Rebecca thought, like what they were, ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Senator Warner opened the proceedings with a brief introduction of the proposed Caregiver Support and Resources Act, legislation inspired in part by the Sullivan story. Then he turned to Nathan and Rebecca, inviting them to share their experience with the committee. Nathan began, his voice steady despite the intimidating setting. He outlined his career as a park ranger, the stroke that had changed everything, and the cascading financial disasters that followed. He spoke without self-pity but with unflinching honesty about the gaps in the system. The limited rehabilitation covered by insurance, the astronomical costs of home care, the absence of respite services for caregivers. When it was Rebecca's turn, she took a deep breath, conscious of the cameras recording her every word for the evening news. Their publisher had cautioned them about potential backlash once the full details of their story became public knowledge. But they had made their decision, complete transparency, whatever the consequences. 3 months ago, I drove my husband to Oak Ridge Point and left him there to die. She began, her clear statement causing a ripple of murmurs through the hearing room. I was exhausted, bankrupt, and hopeless after 3 years of round-the-clock caregiving with no support, no relief, and no future, except watching everything we'd built disappear. She continued without flinching, describing the moment of decision, the drive away from the mountain, the overwhelming guilt that had followed. She explained how Nathan had been saved not by the healthcare system that should have supported them, but by the intervention of a wild wolf he had once rescued, a twist of fate so improbable it had captured national attention. I am not proud of what I did, she concluded, her voice wavering slightly for the first time. I will live with that decision for the rest of my life. But I am here today because our story, as unusual as it is, represents a silent crisis happening in homes across America. Caregivers are drowning, and when caregivers drown, patients suffer. The system failed us. It's failing thousands of others right now, today, as we sit in this hearing room. The senator's questions were respectful but probing, exploring the details of their financial collapse, the specific gaps in service that had created their crisis, and the changes that might have prevented Rebecca's desperate act. Throughout, Nathan and Rebecca maintained the direct honesty that had characterized their book and public appearances, refusing to soften the harsh realities of their experience. When the hearing concluded after nearly 3 hours, they were swarmed by journalists and advocates, all wanting additional comments or commitments to future interviews. Senator Warner's aide eventually intervened, escorting them to a private room where they could decompress before facing the media gauntlet outside. You were magnificent, Nathan told Rebecca once they were alone, reaching for her hand. Absolutely unflinching. I was terrified, she admitted. Still am. Once this airs tonight, everyone will know what I did. Not just the sanitized version, but the ugly truth. The truth is never as ugly as secrets, he reminded her. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. What came next surprised them both. Rather than the public condemnation they had braced for, Rebecca's testimony sparked a national conversation about caregiver syndrome and the moral complexities surrounding end-of-life care. For every online comment calling for her prosecution, there were dozens from exhausted caregivers expressing profound understanding of her breaking point. The media coverage focused not on judging Rebecca's actions, but on examining the systemic failures that had created her impossible situation. Medical ethicists debated the concept of rational suicide and the rights of both caregivers and patients. Veterans groups rallied around Nathan, highlighting the inadequate support for disabled service members. Wildlife conservation organizations embraced Ghost's part of the story, using it to advocate for predator protection. By the time they returned to Virginia, the Caregiver Support and Resources Act had gained 12 additional co-sponsors in the Senate. A companion bill had been introduced in the House. Healthcare advocacy groups were organizing a march on Washington, with Nathan and Rebecca invited as keynote speakers. Their personal inbox overflowed with messages, some from media outlets and public figures, but mostly from ordinary people sharing their own caregiver stories, expressing gratitude for the Sullivans' willingness to break the silence surrounding these struggles. I never expected this, Rebecca confessed to Nathan as they sorted through the correspondence one evening. I thought people would hate me for what I did. People recognize truth when they hear it, Nathan replied, setting aside a particularly moving letter from a woman caring for her husband with Alzheimer's. And they're hungry for someone to acknowledge how broken the system is. Their newfound platform brought responsibilities neither had anticipated. They established a foundation to provide emergency grants to caregivers in crisis, funded initially by their book proceeds and growing through donations as their story spread. Rebecca began training as a caregiver advocate, working with local hospitals to develop better discharge planning for families. Nathan consulted with the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center as it took shape, ensuring it reflected his vision of respectful coexistence with predator species. Through it all, their personal recovery continued. Nathan's physical rehabilitation showing steady progress, Rebecca's emotional healing advancing through therapy and the purpose she'd found in advocacy. The fractures in their relationship, so profound in the aftermath of Oak Ridge Point, gradually mended through honest communication and shared purpose. Spring came to the Blue Ridge Mountains, bringing wildflowers and new growth to the forests surrounding their home. Nathan, now walking confidently with a cane for longer distances, suggested a drive to Oak Ridge Point, their first return since the fateful day that had changed everything. They went alone, declining Michael's offer to accompany them. The trail was still too difficult for Nathan to manage entirely on foot, but a Park Service ATV arranged by Dr. Lawson transported them to within 100 yards of the outlook. From there, Nathan walked slowly with Rebecca's support, his improved strength allowing him to navigate the final approach. The view was as magnificent as they remembered, rolling mountains in fresh spring green, valleys cut by silver ribbons of water, the vast sky arching overhead. They sat on the same flat rock where Rebecca had left Nathan months before, the memory of that moment present but no longer overwhelming. "Strange to be back here," Nathan said, gazing across the landscape. "The last time I saw this view, I thought it would be my last sight on Earth." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "I never imagined we'd return together like this." "Life takes unexpected turns," Nathan smiled slightly. Sometimes it sends a wolf to redirect your path. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the wind in the pines and the distant call of birds. The place that had nearly become Nathan's tomb had transformed in their minds, no longer a site of desperation and abandonment, but a turning point that had ultimately led to renewal. As they prepared to leave, Nathan paused, his ranger's instincts suddenly alert. "Wait," he said quietly. "Look there." Rebecca followed his gaze to the forest edge about 50 yards away. At first, she saw nothing. Then a shadow separated from the trees, gray against green, still as stone except for alert, upright ears. "Ghost," she breathed, hardly daring to move. The wolf stood watching them, his distinctive notched ear and powerful build unmistakable, even at this distance. He made no sound, no movement toward them, maintaining the proper separation between wild and human worlds. But his presence was deliberate, his yellow eyes fixed on the humans he had once saved. "He's checking on us," Nathan said softly, wonder in his voice. "Making sure we're okay." They remained motionless, respectful of the distance Ghost maintained. After a long moment of silent connection, the wolf turned and melted back into the forest, disappearing as completely as if he had never been there. "Will we see him again, do you think?" Rebecca asked, as they made their careful way back to the waiting ATV. Nathan considered the question, leaning on his cane as they navigated the uneven ground. "Maybe, maybe not. But it doesn't matter, does it? He's where he belongs, and so are we." As they drove down from the mountain, the forest opened occasionally to reveal glimpses of the valley below, their home, their community, the rehabilitation center taking shape on its new site. The life they had rebuilt from the ashes of desperation. Not the life they had planned, but one with meaning and purpose nonetheless. "What's next for us?" Rebecca asked as they neared home, the question encompassing all the possibilities their unexpected journey had created. Nathan smiled, reaching across to take her hand. "We keep going, one day at a time. We tell our story. We fight for change. We remember what Ghost taught us." "Which is?" "That sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. That old wounds don't have to define us. That finding your way back to your pack is what matters most in the end." As twilight descended on the Blue Ridge Mountains, a lone howl rose from the distant ridgeline, Ghost calling to his pack, a wild voice echoing across the ancient valleys. In the Sullivan home below, lights shone warmly through windows, illuminating two people who had walked through darkness together and emerged against all odds into light. When life writes its harshest chapters, sometimes salvation arrives in unexpected forms. Nathan and Rebecca's journey, from desperation on that mountain to renewed purpose, reminds us that even our darkest moments don't define us. Like many of you caring for loved ones or facing health challenges, they encountered a broken system that left them financially ruined and emotionally exhausted. Yet through an extraordinary encounter with Ghost, they found not just survival, but transformation. Their story speaks to all of us who've felt abandoned by systems meant to protect us, who've made impossible choices, who've wondered if tomorrow is worth fighting for. Remember, it's never too late for a new chapter. Whether you're the caregiver or the one needing care, your story isn't finished. The path forward may look different than you planned, but meaning and connection await, sometimes in the most unexpected places. Has there been a moment when kindness returned to you unexpectedly, years after you'd forgotten a good deed done? Or have you found purpose after facing your own personal wilderness? Share your story below. Your words might become someone else's lifeline today.